What's up, guys? It's DK. Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. Why are you even here, though? Didn't you know Ginger Man bad?
Right, this is going to be another one of my donated discussions. For this one, as is tradition, since we have a new person joining the group, which is Kris with a K, we're going to open the floor to him. Do you want to pick a specific topic? Maybe to open up, give people a little bit of background, like what games do you follow, to, maybe what year you started following esports games, what your interests are, and then if you have an initial topic, we'll go from there.
Sure. I actually have a pretty shallow background as far as esports is concerned. Started following in 2014, back when Ninjas in Pajamas was like all the rage, and felt like Counter-Strike was really starting to blossom into something that was pretty cool. In college at the time, I was turned on to Counter-Strike and started following the esports scene, and became a big fan of Fnatic at the time. And that's something that definitely carries through today, where I'm wearing my Fnatic jersey in solidarity, which I guess we can transition that into the topic that we can kind of start into with what
is CS:GO like the main esports game? Do you have any others you dabble in?
Yeah, that's basically it. I've done some VR stuff. There's a game called Pavlov. I've done some content around. I've kind of put on shows.
Does it ring a bell?
Yeah, it's not big. It's not big. Yeah.
Right, then,
but basically,
what's the first topic going to be then?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about Fnatic and what kind of what in the world that org is doing today, and kind of because I know that org is kind of in a little bit of struggle time, if you will. You have any thoughts?
Sure. I mean, basically, I notice the problem is, right, it's basically impossible in esports to convince a fan that someone who's winning inside the server is not winning in business, even though anyone who's actually has any experience in the business world will know, like, there's almost no correlation between the two. Like, there isn't as much as it's equivalent to, like, having a fast car in Formula One. Yeah, in theory, you should win, but only if you have a really good driver. If you have a terrible driver, you won't win. It doesn't matter how good the car is. So the problem I have is basically Fnatic for a long time now has been like close to the brink. I would say we're talking like maybe half a decade. Like, do people imagine, and unfortunately, if you don't know League of Legends, it's not going to be as obvious because the cracks really start to show in that game. But basically, in League of Legends, there's a reason why they won 3 out of the first 4 splits, lost every single member of their team except 1, and went with 4 rookie players to replace them with. They didn't do that because they thought those 4 players were the best players in the world, and now they looked into an amazing squad that actually then did win the splits, etc. So I think that masked basically the initial part of the fall. What people should have been asking is, why would the 2 most tenured players in Fnatic just up and leave and go make a new org, basically having to start over themselves and re-qualify to LCS at a time when it was very dangerous to not be in LCS. You basically lost your career if you weren't at that point in time. So I think people missed that because they were very, very good. And basically in League of Legends, they always covered their tracks by, again, just having good recruiting or using the status of being Fnatic to draw people to the team. And crucially, as long as you kept hold of 1 or 2 of the legacy names, so in League of Legends, if you kept Reckless, kept certain other names, you could always attract some talent to you just because they want to play with those players and they want to win in the game. And luckily, up until about, say, 3 years ago, I would say, in League of Legends, the actual money in the European side wasn't that high. Like, the North American side was much, 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 much higher. So it also meant if you were European and you didn't want to leave your home in Europe or leave just living in Europe in general, you mainly would just go to a European team. They were one of the better ones. You'd have a chance to go to Worlds. And basically, it was all secondary factors that kept you in the team. It wasn't anymore that you were a fantastically managed team in terms of the finances. So if you look over at CSGO, I mean, there's a similar contrast. If you know the game, they lost their team in CSGO. Basically, let's think, what time was it? It was basically, obviously, Pronax retired and then went to Godsent. And then it was towards the end of the next year, the year after their dominant year, 2016. Towards the end of that year was when famously a bunch of them jumped ship, and basically Godsent at one point in time had 4 of the 5 like classic Fnatic players. And then what people forget is some of them just went back like last minute over to Fnatic just before the major, basically. In fact, that was like a mini scandal, because basically since the major spot the legend spot was decided by having 3 out of the 5, they basically just played God with which organisation got to have that spot for the major, and they almost made Fnatic, if they hadn't have gone, they would have had to go to the minor, like, I think something ridiculous, like last minute, like a week before or 2 weeks before or something. So they've essentially not been in a great spot. It's basically when the VC money came in, the venture capital money, because a lot of the organizations that were the legacy organizations, the SK Gamings, Fnatic, you go and look in North America, TSM, Cloud9, these teams initially, their approach was, well, we're actually sort of running these teams as pretty good businesses, actually. Like, we make all this money from sponsorship. You know, the costs aren't crazy. Salaries aren't too out of control yet. Back then, you know, a good Counter-Strike player might make $10,000 a month, $7,000 a month. A League of Legends player, not as crazy, anywhere crazy as you might have heard people like Bjergsen already made in the West, but even so, nothing compared to the inflation they have in salaries today. So back then, their philosophy was, why would I give any equity away in my org if I've already got one of the best orgs now? I've got the best players generally because I had one of the best orgs. You're going to get some good players if you overinflate the market, sure, but that doesn't mean you're going to win in the game. And therefore, maybe you just burn through your cash and you're out the door, as happened to a bunch of teams. You can think of a bunch of teams that came along in 2015, 2016, 2017 that came into CSGO, came into League of Legends, and they were gone in a year or two, even if they were big names and they had big money behind them and they inflated the market. So essentially what happened was some of those names, quite frankly, most of them except Fnatic, realized very quickly, well, eventually it's going to get out of control. Like, if they can really pay 3 times more salary than I can, well, then as soon as they get a couple of good players, the same effect's going to happen. People are going to want to play with the good players and have triple the salary. Like, at that point in time, you're not picking Cloud9 necessarily if the other team can be as good. In fact, this is what happened in League of Legends. Team Liquid overtook all the other teams by just outspending them and having a little bit of the basis. You had 1 or 2 players that people wanted to play with. So what happened with Fnatic that kind of fucked them, basically, is they were never that great a business. And so, whereas the other owners, like the Cloud9s of the world, TSM, they took on some VC, but like in probably the shrewdest min-max possible. They took on like the minimum you needed to get the maximum impact, and then they sold it off slowly. I've actually heard, by the way, this is an area, here's some behind-the-scenes info, where actually TSM, Team Liquid rather, to get that success in games like CSGO and League of Legends, they actually gambled more. Like, they sold way more of their equity and way earlier to get the big money to overtake these teams. So that was their strategy. They don't have as much later. And the reason why that's a big deal is because I understand why those original owners that had like the big legacy brands wanted to play that game, because what they're basically saying is, if the whole scene keeps getting inflated and pumped up with valuations for teams, every year I wait and don't give away some of this equity now, the amount I can get for the same equity in a few years is more. And obviously in a few years, I might not want to have given away 40% of my org or 30% of my org or something like that. So basically, Fnatic totally misplayed that angle. And as a result, Fnatic have basically had to run numerous, like, almost borderline grifts on their own fans. Like, if people forget, they launched that whole line called Fnatic Gear, where they made it sound like, oh, we've partnered to make you a bunch of keyboards and mice for you. It was literally like a Kickstarter where you just, you know, when they do Kickstarters for a book, and if you pay the $10 option, you get the book. And that's the whole point, is you basically just paid for the book to be sent to you, right? That's what they were doing. You were just paying for them to make you a keyboard. It wasn't anything like, as if I like went to, you know, the biggest keyboard manufacturer in the world and had some amazing deal, the Fnatic line. It wasn't that. Then they had this thing they did, I think it was like, what, 2 years ago, 1 year ago now, where they did a similar thing. They were like, great news, we're going to let you own a part of Fnatic, and suddenly fans could buy some sort of like small amount of stock that had no influence over anything except you gave them some money, and I'm not even sure how that will ever be even redeemed. Like, if you, anyone who doesn't know about stocks and shares, by the way, there is massive amounts of loopholes and fuckery involved with that, where you can essentially, I don't know in this case, but you can be given stuff that essentially can be rediluted, like, can just never do anything. They can even force you to sell at certain points in time. Like, it's a very complicated area. It's not like a movie where it's like, I own 4%. It's that you don't. Like, it all depends on what the specifics are. And basically, because no one in esports understands even even Econ 101, they don't have any clue about any of these topics. And what they do is they look in the server, and you saw this in CSGO, when they have a revival and some of the players come back to form and they have the big success, to a fan, you must be one of the best orgs. It must be awesome. You know, why would someone not want to play for Fnatic? It's like, well, there's some very good reasons for that, I'm afraid. So that's the setup. Where did you want to go with this then, Kris?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's basically kind of that's basically a pretty good summary of like the thoughts of like, Fnatic has such one of the more powerful brands in Counter-Strike. If you look at some of the viewership figures for teams across Counter-Strike, right? You think of the top are the Brazilians, right? You come as you go down. I know one of the big ones that have always been up there is Cloud9 as well. And then always in top contention has been Fnatic, right? So you always think like, of course, like this is such a powerful brand. This has such a great team. They were the best team for such a long time. Like maybe it was only a couple of years, right? But they've always been in contention, right? And now they've kind of started to fall off, and you can kind of start to see, like you said, the cracks show where, you look at their, as you mentioned, the League of Legends side, right? They start bringing in rookies. Well, you're starting to see that on the CSGO side. Well, what benefit does rookies provide, right? We're raising talent, right? Talent's great and all, but they don't deliver you immediate value either in the server or as an asset to hold, right? You're not going to sell a young rookie when you have someone like Golden who's going to provide more value, right? Like, when you think about other teams who are also mirroring this strategy, think of teams like Astralis, who are bringing in younger talent, who are going to say, hey, why would I sell Bubsky when I could sell Device? And when he is on Astralis, his value increases just by being in the mere presence, right? So, but the immediate short-term benefit is I don't have to buy a really expensive player. And that starts to show where it's like, well,
also maybe you play for less salary. It's an obvious one if they jump in levels.
100%.
In a world where, some of those players might be on 30K a month salary.
Absolutely. Right. So you can start to see where it's like, you can see the confidence level of the business side of Fnatic start to show. And we can even expand that out to various organizations in the Counter-Strike space. But that's basically kind of like what is CSGO staring? Is Fnatic like the canary in the coal mine of, I don't know if this canary is like the third canary in line or not, but like definitely something that's close to my heart because I've watched them. This is a legacy organization that's been around for a long time.
What do other people think?
I got a perspective on this that's a bit unique, I think, in that, or maybe not, maybe this is more common, but I honestly have just forgotten that Fnatic exists in CS, to be completely frank with you. Like, not forgotten in the sense that somebody reminds me and I'm like, oh yeah, those guys. But it's more like they're not in the top running. They're not in the talk of the town. Nobody's considering them a top team.
They're ranked number 26 in the world right now. I just looked it up.
There you go. Yeah, according to HLTV. So at that point, then you're dealing with a team that's not on anybody's radar at this point from competitive CS standpoints, which is what they're supposed to be known for. And I don't think that the players, generally speaking, have built enough of a brand to keep themselves relevant. I think, you'll see a Reddit clip every now and then of JW doing something on stream. It's like once a month, maybe. It's not very common. And to the point where I guess maybe this is a distinction between the League of Legends and the CSGO crowds, where they kind of follow the players a little bit more, I would say, attentively outside of the professional matches that they play. In Fnatic's case,
streaming also really isn't that big a thing in CSGO, to be fair. Like,
sure,
unless it's simple, like no one's really watching your own personal stream. Like that's one thing CSGO's never had, really. Like back when Fnatic was the best team in the world in 2015, you could go watch all of my stream and you didn't even have that many viewers, mate. But no one really gave a fuck,
I could keep going.
Yeah, I mean, in general, my take is just that Fnatic don't seem like they're in the space, in the mind space. They've lost all the mind share just by not being in the top space. So I don't know if other people agree with that, but for me, it's just I haven't actively thought about them. And in theory, I'm supposed to be a pundit on a talk show or whatever. So you'd think I would have to think about CS teams that were relevant. Fnatic just aren't on the list.
I definitely agree that they've kind of fallen out of relevance. Like, it's been a while since we've looked at them with any expectation of competitiveness. But I don't know that it's a tribute to inability of the organization to get decent talent or what, but I just don't think that they're going to come back to CS superiority again. So coming into bringing in rookies and stuff like that, that's how they are going to get back to being a good organization. And I don't see that organizations bringing in rookies so that it as basically anything other than we are building a talent which has capital behind it. So this is somebody that we can sell and demand a buyout for. I feel like, I guess I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but I don't think that the connection between why would I sell Bubsky when I can sell Device? I think you would be looking to sell Bubsky because Device is worth more to any team because of his veteran status.
Say that last line again. Like it sounded like the first half of the sentence like fell apart. What was the last line about Bobsky? Say that again if you can.
Kris was talking about why would I sell Bubsky when I can sell Device? Yeah. I think that Device is in a better position to serve any organization than Bubsky. So I would take basically my small investment from Bubsky, make big on that, and keep Device and pick up another rookie.
Yeah, but the problem with that is, like, first of all, you're talking about Astralis there, which is a totally different game. Like, Astralis' head people just want to make a load of money. They don't give a fuck about sports or esports. They don't care a damn about Counter-Strike. Like, you can see by the way they've managed the team. So you look at their org, I can tell you, first of all, they want to sell all the players. So it's not even like they're picking between them. But the reason why they would sell Device first is because you'll never get more for him than you do now. Like, this is when it's the best possible time to sell him. And you get, like, potential. It wasn't really $1 million or whatever, but you can say it's $1 million. The difference is this. Eventually, you want to sell Bobsky, but you want to build his value up. Like I've revealed before, they were trying to sell him for like $700,000 and nobody was biting, unsurprising, because that's an outrageous number. So they wanted to sell that. Now, personally, I think the reason why you sell Device first if you're Astralis is because the scam is this. When you sell the individual players, you in theory are selling like a legit product. Like if you buy Device, it's a very good AWP. If you buy Glaive, it's a very good in-game leader. If you buy Zipnix, it's a great veteran. But what you're trying to do is do a Theseus' ship with just enough of the players, hopefully 2 or 3, that it looks as DreamHack's helping out like a motherfucker with the PR. Oh, the new core of Astralis is now Glaive, Zipnix, and Dupree. Weird, because it was, last time I heard it was Device, Dupree, and Zipnix the whole time. But now it's changed. So what you want to do there is, and all the TOs will help you with this. Blast will help you, DreamHack will help you, ESL, because these cocksuckers never found a disingenuous narrative they could turn away from, because they want to sell their short-term hype of the event. What they're trying to tell you is, it's still Astralis. This is still Astralis that won all the majors. So the end goal of your Nihum and the others in Astralis is sell as many of the small pieces for as much as you can. So the obvious two to sell would be Glaive and Device. They're like the pieces that have the most value. Then keep, if you can, 3 of the others. Bring in a couple of players that have some potential. Bobsky obviously has potential. You've even seen it now. He actually gets to play maps. And then what you want to do is turn around and flip that whole lineup to someone Chinese, someone new to esports, someone coming from the sports world. Make them think, I mean, bad luck for them if they tune into the tournaments, because they're going to believe watching DreamHack that they must be the original core. They're going to think, I'm buying the core that won the majors. And then they're going to pay $5 million for that lineup. And at the end, you will have made collectively way more than you could make selling all those players individually, and if you started with the worst players. So it's all about, obviously, like reverse engineering where you want to get to. If you just want to make money, selling Device first is the better angle, because for temporarily, Bobsky gets status of like, it's still Astralis, even if it isn't. So there's that angle. In terms of Fnatic, I actually think in CSGO, they got lucky in a way they didn't even in the other games. In the other games, like League of Legends, you don't go by nationality in League of Legends. You just have to, in theory, be European. So they never had any issues there with the fact that, like, in CSGO, it has to be someone Swedish, right? They don't bring in Norwegians. They don't bring in Danes at the moment. Well, one of the things I think people haven't figured out is this. Remember, there was a period when Golden and Flusher weren't in this team. They were both in Cloud9. If that Cloud9 team wasn't just A, super unlucky, and then B, never really lived up to the billing, they're never coming back to Fnatic. They were off getting nice salaries, like change of pace. Also, Fnatic didn't want them. I know everyone loves to forget that. And JW had that sort of very disingenuous argument with me on Twitter, where basically I'd have had to just expose, like, you know, people just saying things that I can't show publicly to show that he's a liar. So, as usual, you win again if you just sort of temporarily lie against me. That's the way it tends to go in CSGO. Basically, if those 2 players don't come back, they never have that resurgence. They never have that crazy, like, because part of that, to me, that last team that was really good on LAN was like, that was chemistry. The second they made that lineup again, the chemistry was there. So then, here's the one last factor I'd say is this. There are obviously rookies that deserve to be put in top teams. Like, the extreme is like Ziwu, right? But I would say, take an outlier like that out of the equation. The kind of rookie you want is obviously Rops, right? He already was going to be a tier 1 player when he came in, and then you hope he develops more. These rookies they bring in nowadays aren't even tier 1. That really is just taking a guy from some lower level spot and just chucking him into, not just like on the bench, just a starting position on a top team and sink or swim. And quite frankly, they don't do it because they actually think they're the best. They do it to save money. They do it to save salary. They do it as just a way to mix things up, maybe avoid having to cut a veteran. And all I'll say about Fnatic is this. Look who the rookies they're bringing in are. Jaquinho, Peppers. Now, a thing a lot of people missed about the device to nip move is if you go back, Device actually literally at the end of last year shouted out 2 players, one was ZTR, that are in nip now. They knew those players. Those players were players potentially on the rise. I never heard a fucking peep about these 2 players until they joined Fnatic. So the concern I have there is I don't even think they get the good rookies from Sweden. And then you look at the fact that, sure, because of the LAN success, I don't blame Fnatic at all for holding on to the old lineup. But in doing so, they've done a North and they've missed the entire next crop of Swedish talent because Nip's got them all. And now Nip's added Device, you're not getting any of those players. It's game over. So I think they're in a really tough spot. I think even going with the rookies, they're going to be in a hard spot because none of these players, unfortunately, there is no third Swedish team. No one has any of the experience. None of them have played LANs, it goes without saying. And most of them aren't even the guys that if you were to put them in, I mean, I know they don't really play FPL, they play that like eSport or whatever in Sweden. Like, they're not the guys that you have to sign on. They don't have that kind of crazy hype. And I'll just say as well, you'll notice that whole angle of get FPL players is mega played out as it is. It's basically Rops. Frozen doesn't even count. He was already playing like tier 3 for quite a while. It's basically Rops. Like, aside from that, who are these amazing FPL players that everyone's going on about, except for in the online era? So,
does
to
Zyrathenia
me,
count?
Not really, because here's the thing. Zyrathenia would actually have been already in a pro team. It's just that like he had to do school, and then also people who at the top thought he cheated because he was too good, which, by the way, is absolutely reasonable if you look back now. So, like,
granted, too, he was also on that AAA team before he joined Vitality as well. So
he also had played some tier 3 Counter-Strike, but that was basically because you didn't have to do much and you could still do school at the same time. So to me, he's like the outlier in that one.
Right,
Gotcha.
Right. Yeah, no, it's and if you look at in Ninjas in Pajamas too, you could definitely see how, Fnatic definitely missed the bus, right? And I remember vividly the Flashpoint Q&A that Golden did, where basically you kind of just straight asked him, is there any upcoming talent in Sweden? And he basically said, no.
Every Fnatic player I had on my shows never knew any of the up-and-coming talent. None of them.
Yeah, it's mental because you look at Ninjas in Pajamas and it looks like they've got at least decent pieces, right? Like ZTR, when he debuted on the roster, he was on another tier 3 Counter-Strike team, and he came in a nip and was like, oh yeah, hey, this is all right. He looked pretty all right. He definitely looked a little lost, for his first major event, but you look at what he's playing and he looks all right, and evidently he's like partially in-game leading on some of the maps. Like, what in the world kind of value did they just get? And Fnatic just breezed right over them, right? Like, oy.
I do think as a side tangent, the idea of calling on only some maps is pretty absurd. I don't know why teams seem to do this a bit more often now than I remember. I think the first time I heard this was the MIBR lineup where Cold was calling on one map. Maybe it was Mirage.
I think it was 2. It was it was like they claimed like Stewie called on Mirage, then Cold called on 2 maps, and then Fallen called on the others. I can tell you, by the way, every time anyone in history has ever done that, that means A, vote of no confidence in the real IGL, which is what was happening to Fallen. B, the other guy, you still don't trust him enough to give him the IGL completely, so you want to test him out before you just sink the ship entirely by switching to him. And then if they ever go to a third player as well, at that point in time, you're just completely lost. You're just in the middle of the wilderness. So, like, I've never ever heard of an example of a team that had a good in-game leader that ever thought splitting the maps like that made any sense. Same thing happened, if you remember. Another great example would be at the end of the G2 super team with Kenny S and Shox, where Apex was calling only on the T side of Mirage. What that says to me is, you just don't know how to call T-side of Mirage. By the way, it's probably the most fucking basic maps in all of Counter-Strike. So if the entry's calling it, like, you are absolutely lost completely on that map. Like, same thing with MIBR where Stewie was doing it. Like, that's almost just an admission that no one knows what they're doing. They always sell it. If anything, this is the sort of thing that people like Astralis ruined Counter-Strike with. You always have to, if you notice, right, it's actually, I don't know if any of you go back far enough, but it's one of the things I've always despised about my old nemesis Carmack, which is he will absolutely, like, put it this way, here's the example. if Carmack had like a beautiful antique table and then one leg got smashed off it, he would go for sale, incredibly rare 3-legged antique table. One of a kind piece.
Right, yeah.
You sell up as a positive, the obvious negative that cannot be denied. So basically all these orgs, whenever they try to do it, they always make it like that. We're innovating the game and stuff. It's like, no, there's a reason why Glaive doesn't go, you can have a map actually, Magisk, I'm just going to do these 4. Like, he just has them all, doesn't he? It doesn't make sense.
It's like trying to have 2 quarterbacks. I feel like the only team in recent memory that I've felt has done that to any reasonable degree is the Saints with Jason Tatum. And even then, it's still a gimmick. You don't do that as your primary modus operandi. That just shows...
Taysom Hill, you meant?
Oh, yeah.
Jason Tatum's the
My
NBA
bad.
player, but yeah.
Thank you.
And that was also, to be fair, because like Drew Brees was actually injured and his arm stopped working about 10 years ago, but yeah. To some
been
degree.
effective to reasonable degrees.
Remember, if you are the quarterback of the Saints, your job is to throw the ball to Alvin Kamara and then just fucking sit back and watch and go, it's amazing. Wow, you just got a touchdown again. Fucking hell. That was me. That was all me.
Back by committee.
Basically, yeah. Does anyone else to go with the Fnatic topic?
Unless anyone else wants to jump on it. No, that's about all. I feel that's pretty
All right.
flushed out, right?
All right, someone else bring me a topic then. Who else has something we're going to go with? What about you, Eddie? You haven't talked much, mate.
Oh, I actually wanted to follow up with something you had said pretty early on in that last discussion, which was you were mentioning about how TSM was min-maxing the equity for VC, and Liquid was kind of a bit more risky.
The equivalent of they just took out more money initially and then just thought, we'll beat you by outspending you, yeah.
So I guess that's something that I don't have a lot of experience in understanding that sort of... I understand the language, but I don't understand the context of the language. So you were
I'll make it very simple.
Equity with an organization. What kind of equity doesn't it work as? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, as in just think of it as owning a percentage of the team. So am I going to sell 5% in 2016? Well, think about it logically. Since the market is way lower, the overall amount that the valuations are worth, 5% of my org at that point in time might be, I'm going to make up a random number here, obviously. Maybe that's worth $4 million, right? Mm-hmm. But if you waited and you could also survive competitively in the meantime and still be in good position, maybe the same 5% 4 years later is $10 million to you. But you give away the same amount of equity, but you have $10 million to spend instead of the 4. So that's basically the game that they were all trying to play. Is like, I'm definitely going to have to sell the equity because like even if you were profitable as a team, you're never making enough to have like $20 million to spend on payrolls and stuff. Right. So at that point in time, you're in an arms race rather of inflating salaries and all that. So the question at that point in time for the old legacy orgs like TSM and Cloud9, the obvious ones that actually were doing a very good job in business, was just like, when do I sell? And if you notice, they held out to the bitter end. Like, it's not that TSM doesn't think these players are brilliant, mate. Like, if TSM really wanted to, they could have gotten a whole bunch of much better players than they've had in League of Legends the last few years. They would have, in fact, had a CSGO team. I can reveal it now if people don't know. They would have had EG's CSGO team. They were going to be the team that bought them before the former NRG CSGO squad. So they would have spent. The point is, I know Travis made a video on this a few years back. If you actually looked at how many like wins in LCS they were getting relative to how much they were spending on like salary and stuff, Cloud9 and TSM were min-maxing the best. They were like second and third best teams in the league with chances to win the league, and they were spending way less than Team Liquid. And then I think even teams like 100 Thieves were sometimes outspending them at the first point they came into franchising. Is that more clear?
That is more clear. I guess something that had struck me personally, since I had followed both those teams from, basically when TSM was in like the gaming house with like Rain Man and whatnot.
Yeah,
and
old school
Team Liquid.
show.
Yeah, right. Before Team Liquid, it was Curse, as many people will know. Now, do you think Liquid was a bit more ballsy with their VC money because they had the brand of Curse, which for people that don't know, Curse before League of Legends, they were a really big add-on community for like World of Warcraft and other games. So they already had
see where you're going with this, but I have to cut you here, right?
Sure,
because the problem is this. Here's the difference. When TSM brag now that they make money, because really they're just being disingenuous. They don't from the esports team, they make it from the site. Yeah. Here's the thing. Curse, it wasn't actually that Curse was the organization that was the esports team. Steve Arnett, Liquid 112, he basically, I think it was funded by Curse and partially owned by them. And therefore, as far as I know, when he went to Team Liquid, that was like a sale. So I don't think any of that continued through. In fact, I think that's part of why they went to Team Liquid. I think Team Liquid at that point in time gave him like more power as like a corner or something. I'm not quite sure what his title was before that. Maybe he was like, director of esports operations or something. Because I know actually Kris, the network, as I'll allude to what your point is, that's actually like my MCN on YouTube, for example. It's like, it was called the Union of Gamers. I can't remember what it's called now, but that was like one of the big ones back in the day when you didn't used to by default get a great split from YouTube. They would, like, if you signed up with them, they would give you like the 90-10 split, which was the best you could get at the time. So yeah, they were an enormous network. But as far as I know, they were quite loosely connected to it.
Okay, because I just remember early on too in League's history, I think Kris was one of the first like really extreme gaming houses. They had that Vegas house with like,
yes,
it was like
they tried to have like reality series type thing, right?
Exactly. Because TSM was doing that, but it was very grassroots because they were doing like vlog style. Then the Kris one felt like almost like Big Brother League of Legends edition.
Yes,
but
they were probably a few years ahead of their time on that. To be fair, if you did that, 2 years ago, I think it would be incredibly popular. It'd also ruin everyone's careers, but they were ahead of the game. That's actually one of the areas as well where it was no surprise to me that Team Liquid became the best LCS org, because I even said back, I think it was in like 2014 or 2015 or something, I said actually, I think the Liquid 112 guy was like the best GM for getting star players. Not GM for like managing the deals, that's very different, but just getting people to sign on the dotted line. Mate, that guy had so much talent come through that team even before they started winning. So I remember thinking, well, fuck, if he's got the VC now, it's game over, isn't it? And as you see, pretty much was for the next few years. I mean, you can even say, if you don't watch League of Legends, by the way, even the last two splits where they've had massive issues, they still almost won. They've still been the team that's in position to potentially win the title. So, yeah, that was just an org that had like everything. It's just, as I say, to me, they sort of gambled in the short term to be able to spend big. But then again, if I look at most of the other games, they still get the players they want. They still sign the big names. So they're doing something right. They must know how to manage it behind the scenes. To be fair, as the valuations go up, again, even if you just sell another percent, you can probably get a lot for it now, a lot more than it was worth 4 or 5 years ago.
Right on. That's it for wrapping up the...
fair enough.
China. So thanks.
By the way, on all that sort of stuff, never ever let anyone shame you or make you feel stupid if you don't know like economic terms or what it means to sell. First of all, I only gave you a layman's version there because I'm a layman. Like, I'm not some expert in business. My understanding comes from contextual, talking to people who are experts, talking to the people in question. Like, those are areas where basically everyone by default is financially illiterate, because just like legalese in the legal world, it's an entirely different world and like language essentially. Like, and the way you model mentally, it's totally different to everyday life. So by default, none of us know about that stuff until we either get informed or hopefully we're looking at ourselves and start to piece it together, I will say there's a lot of people, it's even some people in the esports industry don't know that much about that I see talk, like British way. Jacob Wolf just talks out of his arse half the time he's talking about the business stuff. I've seen him just confuse two numbers completely and be off by like $4 million or something mental in something he reported. So there's a lot of that going around the industry because everyone has to pretend they know every field for some reason,
Right.
I don't. It took me 20 years to learn all these games, mate.
I have a degree in business administration and corporate accounting, and still half of this crap is mysticism to me because I haven't actually experienced it in the real practice of business. So
sure,
even
it's also a game that essentially is effectively like the legal system. It's supposed to be incredibly, incredibly hard and ever moving because that's half the game. Mm-hmm. It's like the people who are the best at it don't want everyone to have easy access and get in and compete with them immediately. They want to have a million loopholes. They want to have tax exemptions. They want to have all these things. They want to have the government related things that they're working on. It's another one of those areas that like has been, I would compare it to like the way that chess has evolved. Like, the odds that you just pick up chess tomorrow and just start playing it from feel and are the best, it's almost non-existent. Like, the amount of like information burden, the amount of legwork you have to put in, the amount of people you're going to have to study to understand the meta, it's intentionally insane because people have put that much effort into it. And obviously in the business world, people want to make money, so people have gone crazy on that shit. So we're all coming in sort of with a losing hand initially, and we've got to level our shit up,
Whenever 100%. You think you've got a good idea, somebody else has one better. You just have to be ready for it and adapt.
Well, it's interesting too. Is like,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, what's interesting too is like when you start to add businesses who have done well and they have a whole bunch of cash laying around. We call that venture capital money, right? So once somebody convinces somebody that has venture capital money that they are an expert in a field that they've never been into, they take that venture capital and they just give it to them, right? And then in the financial world, we call that dry powder. right? Because that has the powerful, think of what you can do with gunpowder. You can make guns. You can make, really incredible weapons of war. You can also blow yourself up, right? So you can kind of see that in a lot of ventured out to fields where once you start bringing in and slinging cash around, right, people start going, whoa. You got a lot of cash you're just bringing in and just eating everything, right? It's super interesting. I'm one of those weird folks that just thinks financials and economics and things like that is incredibly interesting, and absolutely indecipherable at times.
I will say my main interest in that field is to know just enough to know the context of basically like trades and how you put your team together. Because I personally think, just in the same way, I always give this analogy, think about how incredibly unfair it would be to contrast the Milwaukee Bucks in the NBA with the LA Lakers. Like, it doesn't matter how good the general manager is for the Milwaukee Bucks. He will never get the same amount of superstar talent names as the LA Lakers for a million reasons. Some of them not even to do with the org. Like, you can be a celebrity in LA and you can do movies. There's a million factors. The small market team's always going to have a harder time. But if you know that, then you will know that actually how good the Bucks have been recently is incredible. That guy's probably overperforming. That team is overperforming. The fact that they had the MVP, I mean, debatable whether he was, but okay, they had the official MVP. So in that scenario, I didn't want in Counter-Strike, especially in Counter-Strike actually, people to just not understand that and to give these nonsense opinions. Now, I haven't been able to curb it entirely. Like, the point I always made about ENCE still seems to have gone over most people's heads. That might be the most overperforming team in the history of Counter-Strike. When you look at the amount of money they were spending on salary and how new the org was and how little investment they'd taken versus how good the team was. That was a team that, listen, unfortunately, they sort of peaked between majors, but there's a world where it isn't impossible they could have won a major if someone else had beaten Astralis, basically. That was doable. So if you knew that they were making a third, a fourth of some of the teams that were placed below them, the FaZe clans of the world, etc., the Norths of the world, all of a sudden you have to view that in a different lens. You can't just be like, you morons fucked it all up. It's like they really had like a lightning in a bottle there. That was never going to continue and they were never going to recreate it, So you got to put some of that in. Meanwhile, as I just alluded to there, I hate that you can have a scenario like FaZe Clan or Evil Geniuses recently, where cause on paper the players look awesome, and they still sort of just get it together every 1 in 5 games each so they don't get fired, and people can believe in their mind, that's where they should be. He's back where he should be. It means that people are totally unfair, and they give those teams a pass. Like, when people look at those Nico teams, right, they go like, yeah, but he didn't have that one extra key piece he needed. He had every fucking star you could need at the time, and they were being paid mega bucks. And ask yourself this. Here's the one question I never included in my videos that no one ever thought about. If FaZe Clan is one of the highest paying, consistently well-funded teams in esports, one of the teams that I could even believe also makes money with some of the side hustles they have, why weren't all the awesome IGLs trying to join Nico? Do they not want to win the major? The point is, even some of those guys know which way his fucking bread is buttered, so it was more to it than that. So the point is, until you kind of know the financial grounding, the game's too different now. Back in the day, your org could be a tenth of another org, and because the players were the GMs, it's just about having the great in-game leader. It's just about having the superstar player. They'll get you the players. They'll manage all that. You just basically bring them waters and book their flights and get them a mouse sponsor. But in the modern day, you've got to at least have like a grounding in just the basics of, like I'm saying here, where the orgs at, like how much money did they have to spend? Did they overperform? Until you know that, it's going to be really hard to break down like the top 20 in Counter-Strike, because we don't have like a franchise league. I know Flashpoint tried to be, but it isn't. So we don't have like an LCS where you can just assume, well, I'm sure all these teams have the funding. Some of them don't. I mean, another one would be Heroic. Until they got bought out recently, Heroic became #1 team in the world, paying something like €7,000 a month or something.
Yeah. And if you think about what ENCE was basically a tier 3 team that tripped into the semifinals and finals of a major, right? Like,
and there's another example of a team, like I say, they caught lightning in a bottle with that lineup, like the chemistry, they had like sort of just enough skill. No, they didn't create that, no one could sit down and create that. They know they were lucky as well. That's why it was so hard to manage it,
100%.
Can I switch topics over to the map pool of Counter-Strike Global Offensive?
Oh boy!
Ooh.
All right,
Let's go, Frodoga.
An
Let's
ancient
go.
topic.
Yes, it's a well-worn topic. There's plenty of storied history here. So Ancient has decided to replace Train. Valve decided that was a good idea. I'm not sure how familiar everybody. Yeah, I'm not sure how many of you guys here are familiar with the specifics. So we don't even really need to touch on super specific elements of like which map is.
I can give you one that I haven't heard anyone say, Prologo. I'm actually going to do a video on this soon, right? I'm colorblind. Like actually a few famous Counter-Strike players have been like solo in 1.6 if you don't know. Yep. I can tell you it's already bad enough. Like, I know everyone in Counter-Strike who's a pro plays, like, the fucking settings with, like, the digital vibrancies off the scale and, like, they're just cooking their eyeballs 1 inch from the screen. But even so, there's certain maps, Nuke was the classic one historically, where there'll be certain dark spots where if it's dark and it's the wrong contrast, you may as well be invisible if you sat in there. Right, mate, I've never seen a competitive map that was worse for that than this map here. Like, some of those ones, like that weird one-way where they can come from the, like, shadow, I still can't even see him when he's shooting me from there, mate. Like, I am actually blind on that map, effectively. That's where I start, you know. I have to be able to see people before I can fucking know what the tactics are.
Well, there's also a bunch of one-way textures on that map. So, like, straight up, the textures themselves are practically, you're basically...
Also, by the way, if you're colorblind, a very classic one that you can have is where, like, green and brown shades, like, blur into one. That map is almost, like, designed to destroy your eyes. You don't even have a chance, you know. Now, here's the funny thing. There is actually a solve for that. Just no one in Counter-Strike would ever go for it, which is what they did in Quake, where you can have a skin that, like, is very bright for the player model and contrast against the background. But obviously the problem with Counter-Strike is we effectively don't want to have instant recognition. We want, you know, people to be able to hide and be behind a wall and all sorts of angles like that. So one of the reasons I brought that up, though, is because actually, as people were saying when you brought the topic up, mate, half the problem is every time it's about the map pool, people just make the same 5 points over and over again. Like, as far as I could tell, Sponge actually hasn't even given his opinion on Ancient properly. I haven't heard any of the talks, but in terms of what he was saying on Twitter, he wasn't talking about Ancient the map. He was talking about the premise of a new map being released, people judging it before they played it. What do we do with the map pool? How are we ever going to get new maps? People asked for new. He was basically talking around the topic. In fact, his was almost more a reaction to what he knew the backlash would be. So in terms of, like, to me, that's where we've got to define where we're going here. Are we starting out talking about Ancient the map? Or are we talking about a new map coming in? Or a third angle is, are we talking about bringing a bad map in and then what happens from there?
So I think we should start, actually, we can start with option 2, which is talking about whether or not it even makes sense to replace the map pool in this case. So obviously, everybody knows, seemingly, that Vertigo is contentious at best. If you're a Vertigo lover, you even still know it's contentious. But if you're...
Am I missing something, by the way? Because I noticed that pros, they tend not to be very connected with the fans.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, it's only the pros who turned on that map and like it now. Most of the fans, I get the vibe, still don't fuck with it as a map. I mean, is that are you getting a different sense?
There's a stigma on Vertigo from, like, Vertigo Globals and stuff like that I feel like affects a whole lot of fans.
Well,
but I think
unfortunately,
they just can't
Zach,
get from that interpretation.
Unfortunately, the players have fallen prey to the same thing, because the players who like playing on the map, coincidentally, are the players that are winning on that map most.
Sure.
Fair enough.
But they are also falling prey to the same confirmation bias, we'll say, or there's a conflict of interest when you're giving supposed personal feelings about a map that you happen to be, you know, top 1 on in your map pool or whatever.
Sure.
True.
So yeah, the biggest issue with the map pool coming in, and like I actually would feel a little bit more comfortable with Ancient replacing Vertigo than I would with Ancient replacing Train, because
or Mirage.
My background as a game designer is literally looking at maps and saying what is good and what is bad, and I think people have a completely fucked reality and perception on as to what is good about a Counter-Strike map. Inferno Half Wall is a great example of this. Also, the on Overpass, the incendiary that CTs always have to throw every round to stop T aggression out fountain. All of these examples are basically things where there are some nuances there, and some of the nuances can even be whether they exist at all. But 9 times out of 10, maybe more than that, they're going to be these rote, repetitive tasks that an artificial intelligence, if programmed correctly, could do to a higher level of success, which then means that you have a game that is not rewarding you for competitively dominating your opponent. It's rewarding you for, in this case, in this small example, the map is rewarding you for completing a rote task like a good boy. And that's not really what we're here to watch in Counter-Strike. So people just don't recognize this, and they have this fucked perception of what maps are. And yeah, that's only one small part of it. So you can't lose the forest for the trees here. But the biggest issue that I'm getting at, I'm building up here, is that Vertigo is the ultimate example where an entire bomb site is the Inferno half wall or the overpass fountain incendiary. The entire A bomb site is every single round and a rote task, or virtually every round, where some small amounts will pivot over otherwise. So the whole map has been in the map pool for 2 years, and Valve have done absolutely nothing to actually make it competitively viable in terms of, if we had it in a vacuum, would we want it in the map? Would we choose it? Overwhelmingly no. And my concern is everybody's parroting they made Overpass a great map line. They haven't made obviously Vertigo a great.
You'll notice I almost apologized for introducing that in the tweet where I mentioned that point, which I think spurred people to say it, because I agree. Like, Overpass is a great example, but it's also like the most extreme one, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So
it's the exception to the rule.
It basically is. I mean, if you think about all the other maps Valve have added recently, Canals, maybe it wasn't even meant to be competitive, but it was never even tried. The last map that they added before Ancient was obviously Vertigo, the one that they forced into the map pool. And that one has gone down like a fart in an elevator, we'll say. So the biggest issue there is if they're adding another map, but this is, again, before we get to the specific map that is being added and the map that is being taken away, just the fact that they are not removing specifically a map that has been a failed experiment for all intents and purposes, that we as a CSGO community have been held hostage by for 2 years, is already ridiculous. Now, I knew, well, I didn't know, but I would have suspected Valve would never remove Vertigo, as it was just the most recent edition. So it's kind of off limits for them. And even though it, by all data, is about as popular as Train is, they were never going to pick Vertigo. So it makes sense why they've decided to settle on Train, because of statistics, and that's what Valve likes, and they don't really give a shit about the competitive scene. However, the next point is actually considering Ancient specifically, which, by the way, is another 3-lane map. So structurally, it's identical in its origin point, before you get into the nuances, of Mirage and Dust 2. We've got a third map in the map pool that is a 3-lane map. And at this point, like, the whole point of a map, in my opinion, is to introduce a unique battleground, which Vertigo did, but in a flawed way, in a unique in a bad way, but still a unique battleground that serves a different purpose and allows for a different kind of a set of play styles that can find success, where you can be a bit more tactical in terms of how you're maybe making some of these Furia pushes. Like, both Mirage and Vertigo solve this problem. Actually, they serve that kind of purpose, but then they disallow different things, and different strategies can and cannot find success in any given map. And that's the beauty of a dynamic and varied map pool with a lot of variety. You don't get that when 3 maps out of 7 have the same kind of underlying structure. And while some of them are going to undoubtedly play differently than the other, obviously Mirage plays differently to Dust 2 as an example, there's still these underlying consistencies that actually do harm the overall scene of the game, in my opinion. So I don't know. They obviously raised a couple of different points here. Anybody else can jump in, but I'm very disappointed that Train, of all maps, which was the most unique map pool, I would say, map in the map pool, where there weren't as nearly as many rote tasks where you had to do this repetitive robotic action every time, every single round. And it was also a CT-sided map, which maybe Ancient will turn out to be, but it's not guaranteed. And in this economy, in this CSGO economy, you need a CT-sided map in the pool. You can't have T-sided maps, as Vertigo has also shown us. So just one last dig in Vertigo before I throw it off to you guys.
The real irony there, of course, being the map that was 2 CT-sided and everyone hated was Cobblestone. That might actually be playable with this economy.
Yeah,
like, logically, the CTs are going to be on the edge the whole time, so now they can't just have 4 people in the fucking B site and just lock it down with smokes. No, the biggest problem with that whole discussion is the part that you nailed there already, which is we're not even getting to have the real discussion, which is, well, which map should go out and what sort of maps are we looking for? Because we have this fucked up assumption that we have to take, which is Valve will never admit they made a mistake and remove the most recent map. In fact, if you look at the trend, they don't show any signs of removing any of the more recent maps. Like, people were pretty dodgy on Dust 2 when it came in. Okay, that sort of survived the test. I still think it's got issues. I think that's probably mainly economy based. It was a very T-sided map anyway. Nuke, I think the economy actually helped that map, if anything. It sort of made just pit teams able to play the T side. The one for me that's a killer is, I think if you look at Train, well, Train was one of the maps. It was a rework, but they added it in 2015. So that was also one of the oldest ones. And then whenever people say, well, what about Mirage? Mirage, essentially, actually, if you go and watch Pogs, Mirage is the new Dust 2, what Dust 2 used to be. It is just the Pog map. It's the map everyone knows every angle of. You played a million times. You can play it on autopilot. You don't need tactics. You know all the duels. You take the same fights no matter what gun you've got. And if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. So I feel as though like a mixture of like cynically keeping Mirage in because they don't want to have a world where only rework of Dust 2's in the game and there's no cache, no Mirage, and no old Dust 2. But bizarrely, this whole thing of like you're not allowed to remove the most recent map, that already basically fucks the conversation, because if it is a map like Vertigo, we're never going to get past that. If that's the worst map, it's just going to make the map pool suck.
I really thought that if there was any map that was going to be replaced in the near future, it was going to be Mirage. And considering like the point you made, you know, it's a staple crop for the casual CS player that just wants to go and troll.
It's almost like the map you get every time you play Face It, put out with.
Well, it's the map everybody can run. All these Russians, you know, the people who are in lower income situations especially, but Russians are an example where it's overwhelmingly, dominantly popular in those areas in the former Soviet states. And so you don't need a PC to run it. You can run that shit on a toaster.
I would have expected that to be so like we know the usual cycle of pull a map, rework it, replace, blah, blah, blah. Would have expected Ancient in, Mirage out, eventually giving up on Vertigo to move cash back in, but that's probably not even going to happen. I agree. I don't think that Vertigo should be in the map pool much longer, but there's so much pride behind it that I'm sure is with the Valve developers that they just don't want to let go. It can be their next overpass. And thankfully, they gave up on Cobblestone. I don't know what the hell they did or what they were thinking with the Halloween update and the whole layout change. But making it, I mean, requiring no more a double boost for drop is just weird to me, but maybe I'm a purist.
Yeah, I mean, kind of coming from the developer side of things, right? Like things get really, really, really fuzzy when the thing that you're looking at is your baby, right? Which goes to, you know, why Vertigo is probably not going to be removed for quite some time. You know, they just made this map. They put it in Wingman. They put all of this effort into making it work with the Wingman system on the A site, on the B site. They poured all of this blood, sweat, and tears with the map feedback and the minor changes. And, oh, well, if we watch the pros, maybe they've got some input on, you know, there's so much mental investment that goes into that map. You know, like, the initial thought is, of course, they're not going to remove that map. Well, we can't. We put so much work into it. Maybe it's just a couple of tweaks from maybe the community will like it, right? But something like a Mirage, it's so far removed to where I dare not change it. You know, if you think about, you know, where that map came from, CPL Fire, the original thinking of how that map was laid out is basically non-existent anymore. You know, the people who made that map have the ideas of what made that map good aren't there anymore. They can't go and say, well, we're reworking the map. What can we change about it to make it good now? Well, there's no point of reference anymore. So, we can't touch that one because if we touch it, we'll mess it up and we'll ruin what makes that map good. I don't know where Dust 2 fits into that, but for sure, like then we look at the rest of the field, you know, like this is where like basically coin flips come in, right? And maybe this is where the developer in Valve starts to look at, well, let's look at the stats, right? I think it was an HLTV journalist who I am not 100% sure of the name of, posted the professional pick stats where it's like, well, top 30 teams pick Vertigo last and then Train. And then top 20 teams pick Train last and then Vertigo. So maybe that's the competitive community telling us that they don't like Train. So, okay, let's cut Train, you know, so it breaks my heart because Train's such a tactical map, and you know, watching G2 play it for the last couple of days is like, oh god, man, I'm gonna miss that map when it's gone.
It's a great map, but I'm assuming you work in a semi-corporate, if not fully corporate world. You've dealt with change management, and if you've worked with a boomer, you know they're not gonna accept it at first. I understand, like, there was a point where I was 100% with the people that would bitch and complain, pardon the French, about any given change in CS. But going through anything, you realize if you're staying stationary, you're doing nothing, you are rolling downhill. So I feel like the drive for change, screw people's attachment to a map. They can live without it for a little bit because it's going to teach them to play it differently, just like a new software implementation is going to teach people at a company to work differently. I just think that they're on Prono's point, why train?
Yep.
Here's the black pill for you that people won't know, because you have to know the history of the game, basically, in the development of Counter-Strike, which is nobody invented good Counter-Strike maps except in CSGO. Like, believe it or not, I want to know who the fucking guy who made Overpass is. I'm not joking. We should be getting that guy and trying to tap him and see if he can come up with new maps. Not as in, did he make any more? Specifically, if he could make some competitive maps. Because if people don't know all the maps that you love, the original Train, the original Inferno, the original Dust 2, these weren't even made as 5v5 esports maps. They were made as fucking normal Counter-Strike maps, like, 8 versus 8, 10 versus 10, public server maps. The fact that they happen to play well in the pro scene is pure happenstance. Absolutely. And by the way, I've made a video about this back in the day. Counter-Strike in Europe used to be 6v6. That wasn't accommodated for that either, but this is just like absolute survivorship bias almost, of like, well, it made it and it was good, so they must have known that. No, they didn't. No one knew. In fact, I'll give you a bit of info. On the map Inferno in 1.6, it's funny that obviously the box inside the A site is called the Moto box because the player Moto made the sick play when he was trapped behind it. But actually the small pit, which anyone who's an old school player will know, was never called the small pit by North Americans, but we can't repeat what they called it. That used to, underneath the wooden thing, say WVU, WOV, Moto, because basically the original version of that map was way worse and didn't have a lot of the stuff on like the B site and the halls connecting like the area you go up to Boiler. And Moto, who was a pro player at the time, just gave the guy a few tips like, well, I'd maybe add like an extra thing here, or it's too, there's not enough entry points to this bomb site. And the guy just updated the map with them, and it made one of the greatest maps of all time. It's essentially the same map you play in CSGO now. The good thing about a map like Inferno, and to a degree a map like Train, is they're the ones where somehow it's not even about the physics of the game or how the weapons work, because that's obviously different in CSGO. Something about the layout of those maps just sort of works. But then again, we're also, when we do that, this is why it gets super philosophical. Since we've only played Counter-Strike primarily on those maps, we didn't have many maps in CS 1.6. In fact, for most years, it was only a 5-map pool. As a result, we can't even really know what Counter-Strike is. Like, if we'd have had 5 maps that were like Nuke, I'm pretty sure Counter-Strike would be a completely different game, and even certain skill sets would be completely different,
Yeah, so this is the thing I wanted to linger on too and labor the point of is, yes, the survivorship bias is so massive with the maps specifically because nobody had to sit down and thought deeply about Counter-Strike Global Offensive or Counter-Strike 1.6 principles when they were designing the maps. Most of the time, that's not their intended purpose. And that's another reason why I wanted to say, like, to sort of encapsulate my point from before and restate it in a more clarifying manner, is the point that I made about maps having these rote tasks and actually being like in these specific cases of Inferno, Half-Wall, and Overpass, T-Main, and all this, these cases are adaptations that expose design flaws within these maps. I think it's because these maps weren't designed specifically for this until CSGO. And as a result, we've sort of walk through it. It's like the people who have only played, like, I'm going to break people's hearts here, but there's some people whose the only game they've ever played is like Fortnite or League of Legends, and they don't have an example of a good game. So they have no grounds. They've got nothing they can actually compare it to. They've never actually experienced. It would be like somebody if the only anime they ever watched was Attack on Titan, or the only movie they ever watched was the Emoji Movie. These are crazy extreme examples that are hopefully purely
yeah, sure, we get the hyperbole,
yeah. But the whole idea is that there are people out there who don't have that grasp. So that's what people are like with maps. A lot of people have only played the Counter-Strike maps. They haven't played custom maps. They haven't tried to get around it. And so a point that Zach brought up earlier was you have to be ready for change. You have to not be like, you have to be willing to change. And that's a common criticism of people who run the line of logic I'm talking about. Why would you replace Strain? The critique is, don't you want to have some change. Like, what do you got against change? Or CSGO players just never want to change anything. The problem is we want good change. Like, I want good change. I would prefer Ancient to, if Ancient had to come into the map pool for some reason, replace the map that Ancient is like, replace Dust 2, replace Mirage, and then see where we go from there. But for some reason, they replaced a tactical map with a map that in all likelihood is not going to be nearly as tactical or specifically unique in any other capacity. And it reads like Valve doesn't even really know what they're doing.
I don't think they actually know kind of what you're describing there, though. Like, I don't think they know kind of like how we conceptualize. By the way, without tooting my own horn, there's another concept I came up with, which was dividing up the map pool in 1.6 as these maps are the more like fraggy ones. These are the ones that you play the tactical side. Inferno was in the middle classically, you know. Like, I know now it's just like common parlance, because sadly I'm just doomed to be like fucking Freud, where everything great I said, everyone thinks they just already knew from the womb, and then everything that as a result, only my mistakes are left over. You know, like fucking calling Cloud9 to get smashed. But here's the problem, is when you talk about that particular angle, that's where the argument, again, that's why I say you got to define initially what discussion are you having. Because when people are like, well, we got to have change, etc. Like, listen, I know politics has ruined this concept, but all change isn't good. Like, getting cancer is getting change, mate. But I wouldn't want that to continue growing and evolving. I'm going to die if that happens. So certain changes are bad. This particular example, because I don't really know anyone who thought Train was bad. Like, put it this way, I've never seen people call for Train to be removed. Now, that is very key, because usually the teams that didn't like the nuke rework, didn't like the Vertigo initial one, they just straight up kept saying, please remove it, please remove it. People might ban it because they don't want to play it. Yeah. And even then, I personally think they only tend to ban it against the best teams on it. It just happens that if you go and look, this is why the HLTV guy, as usual, has all the stats and none of the context. So he's showing, look, all the top 20 teams, they're not playing Train. Well, go look how many of the teams in the top 5 are good on Train, dickhead. Everyone who's playing against them is going to ban it immediately, aren't they? Like, ask yourself a question, which he doesn't factor in. How many teams have a permanent ban? How many teams float bans? Like, there's a question that would be interesting, right? Because that's going to change why you're banning a map. He's just implying if you ban the map, you hate the map, and therefore it's the worst map. That is a million assumptions baked into the cake there that don't even make sense. So what I would say basically is this. It's like the joke that I know Monty likes to reference from like really old school Family Guy, where Peter goes on a game show, and then when he wins, they're like, right, you can either have a brand new boat or you can have the mystery box. And then basically Peter, because obviously he's like the idiot, like Homer Simpson type, you know, cipher mechanism to make all the jokes work. Lois says, just take the boat. And he goes, no, Lois, there could be anything in the box, like a boat. That's basically what you do when you take out Train. What you're saying is like, oh, what if we get a new map that's really good? What, you mean like Train?
Yep.
Yeah, maybe. But the odds aren't even that we maybe get Train. Maybe we get a worse version of Train. So to me, that's why it's the specific of if we're talking about replacing maps, which I'm totally open for. I've always said, coming from like a background watching StarCraft Brood War, that was essentially what kept the game alive. Yep. If we're talking about specifically removing Train, I haven't actually even heard anyone make an argument for that. That's one of the weirdest things about this discussion, because then as we say, how many people have had it, you know?
No, what's happened is people have worked backwards from the results-based analysis almost, right? It's like, oh, the outcome is Train is removed. Now I will try to justify why Train wasn't removed. And it
really shows you a lot about human psychology, doesn't it? Like, one of the reasons, in my opinion, they can run all these like psyops on everyone in the general public constantly is no matter what you tell a human being, they somehow want it to be that this is like normal and this can be the status quo, and it's not that bad, because it's kind of like the way your brain copes with life, you know. So unfortunately, I definitely have seen a lot of like coping mechanisms in that regard for sure.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is like with it also kind of reflects on Valve of like what they used to communicate a lot more in dev talks and like in the various software. Like,
I think he means on the blog posts that they did.
Not even in the blog post. They did some conferences where they'll have like the dev days and things like that, where it's basically just like hardcore software like stuff. It was basically like I wouldn't even tune into it and I'll write software, right? It's like that dry. But there would always be kind of like glimpses into their kind of process. And to boil it down simply is they took a very data-driven approach where we don't communicate, but we look at the data, because people sometimes miscommunicate. Some people sometimes say one thing, but really want the other things. So the thing is, Valve, I don't think has ever changed that approach. They've lost the nuance of what some numbers mean, right? They go, well, this map isn't picked very often, so it must be bad, right? Without understanding that there is a greater context to the numbers that doesn't live in just the spreadsheet you look at, right? And I mean, this happens in software all across the spectrum. You know, I see it on a daily basis, and I feel like that may be, you know, more of an inclination of like what Valve's outlook on the game looks like from Valve's perspective, or maybe that's a reflection of who's working on the game or who's making decisions. You know, there's so much that we basically just get to guess, right? Because we get no answer. You know, like we're not deemed worthy enough, right? Because I mean, at the end of the day, developers are gods and they know best because they make the decisions and don't let us, you know, they don't care about what we think. They're just like, well, we're going to do it. Here you go.
Yeah. So
they definitely don't, by the way. Like, I've actually talked literally to the Valve devs themselves. I'll tell you, like, they just sort of, like, this is why they'll always be, like, mildly hostile and always sort of have their backs up. They sort of feel like they let us come to their party and now we're trying to ask to change the music. They're sort of like, you know, maybe if I like the suggestion you're making, I would consider it. And then the problem is in CS, we think of it as the other way around. Like, it's like, you gave us, you know, it's your party, but like, we're the ones keeping it going. So the problem is we're all coming from such different positions. Like, there's almost no way we could even meet in the middle.
100%. You know, and it's like, Valve, it's like go on.
When you make a really good point as far as they look at their numbers and they will see that Train is banned X amount of times, and the damage that misattribution as far as like the reasons for that can go is so deep. And I feel like you're absolutely correct. And they have followed entirely too much the data. And it's sad to see them continuing to make these mistakes even after they've attempted to make genuine communication inroads with a community past just the occasional Reddit post. Like, obviously their CSGO account is acting as a direct bridge to the community, but still they look at the numbers and not the personality and the emotion / you know, just the general trend, and make changes like removing Train that, like Pronogo said, we're not opposed to change, we're just opposed to bad change. So if you're going to make a change, make it make sense. Just because it makes sense in the numbers doesn't mean it's going to make sense in a playtest. Anybody who's designed a map knows that.
There's also technically, like, again, we're just taking what sounds like it makes sense and just assuming it's true. Like, just because it's one of the least played maps doesn't necessarily have anything to do with why they removed it or didn't remove it. I mean, if anyone remembers the rework of Nuke in 2016, that was incredibly low played, like to an absurd degree. Like, the amount of teams that were just banning that was mental. And then what was mad was they would all ban it against like the top 3 teams on it. And then here's the joke. Everyone else almost had like a gentleman's agreement. There's like no one was going to pick it, so you didn't even have to ban it till the second rotation. So if they were going off numbers, they would have, it was fucking terrible. They would have removed it 100%. No, we're talking about... the rework was way worse. The discussion we're having here is what we started with. The whole point of why Nuke was great is because it was by far the most CT-sided map. Well, if you haven't noticed in Counter-Strike, the thing that makes CSGO not actually as good a game as past versions of Counter-Strike is it's already mad biased to the T's on the economy. The weapons are better on the T side. The utility's even fucking cheaper for the Molotov. Like, every edge goes to the T side. They dictate the pace. They decide whether they attack. They decide whether they attack in what numbers. So even though, yes, the experience of playing on T side of the old Nuke was terrible, you needed a map that was super CT-sided to make the map pool have some balance to it. There's a reason why, like, that was the era where teams like Very Games were incredibly good. Western Wolves were incredibly good. These are all Nuke teams. Even the Virtus Pro guys early on were mega on that map. The Dignitas guys, like, tactical teams, that was a map that could give them an into the pool. Whereas if you look at the middle period of Counter-Strike, basically when teams like Envious were on a roll, a lot of that was that we went to a map. I mean, we had a map pool that used to have Old Dust 2, Mirage, and Cash at the same time inside the map pool.
Jesus.
Those are 3 maps. Those are just made for loose style of play. And then what happens, unfortunately, is now, obviously, I don't want it to always be that. Like again, just as you don't want every map to be 8-7, you don't want it to be balanced TM every time. No. I'd like it if they cycled, you know. Let's have half a year where it's super tactical maps. Let's have half a year where it's not. I even think it might be a fun angle for how you make your team, you know.
The other thing,
and they make those changes with economy too.
Yeah. No, the economy is a huge part of it. And the whole thing is that, like, again, coming from Brood War, the whole point of some of these map rotations was sometimes they would cycle in more maps that were Z favored or P favored or whatever. So you'd get different maps that favor different races in the game. And that's actually how they balanced the game, because Blizzard did they accidentally a game that was somewhat relatively balanced if you ignored some outliers.
Ow.
And then there was also a bunch of cases where, like, there were some exploits that would just break the game if you used them, that were handshake banned, because again, Blizzard never updates anything competently. So
Like
you
the RA.
get a situation where the map itself, the map pool itself, is keeping the game alive, which is what Thorin referenced earlier. That could also be happening in CS, but instead, I guess maybe technically it is by taking a tactical map and replacing it with a 3-lane map. Maybe that is what Valve are trying to do. But the other issue is, as we were discussing earlier, we can only hypothesize what Valve was thinking, because of course they're never going to communicate and say, at least if they gave us some reasoning, we could attack it. But now it's this mad, like, gaslight filled reality where we have to imagine what Valve's reasoning was and then attack that. But we want to be intellectually honest, so we have to imagine every possible thing Valve could think and attack all of those. And even when it's Doctor Strange, even when I've seen 6,942 universes, I still can't figure out which one where this makes sense. So whatever.
What's wild as well is you can always tell how long someone's been battling this problem with Valve just based on where they're at in, like, the fucking stages of, like, denial. Because what's funny is every single person goes through them. So, for example, like, I was at the beginning of CSGO when me and Lurpus were trying to get all these pros to give feedback, and there was an actual forum that all the pros were invited to, and Valve never updated it, never replied, never read the things that we wrote there. Later on, we had people email them and just get ignored, get dismissed, etc. So I already know that I don't need to hear someone do devil's advocate. But maybe Valve just thinks that the way the community reacts is hostile. So, like, that's when Sponge does that, right? Anyone who watches By the Numbers from back in the day knows Sponge right now is where Richard was like 3 years ago. His position is, well, I've talked to some of the Valve devs, and I know it's not as simple to balance a game, and I know that, all these, like, great devil advocates position. But the problem is, it's all well and good imagining ways that maybe they're not ignoring you and fucked up, when you eventually just see that, like, all their actions show they are ignoring you. And by the way, they essentially, in a polite way, tell you straight up, we are ignoring you. Then eventually, like, you can't use the straw man of, well, because these people are being really rude about the game and they don't care about it, they should also ignore you, Thorin, because, like, you aren't being very polite about it. It's like, could imagine trying to have a one-sided conversation with someone for 10 years and then at the end of it go, why, you're being a bit rude to him now, aren't you? It's like, well, he has never fucking spoken back. Yeah, eventually you're going to get frustrated with that, aren't you? Oh, by the way, what's the other option? You just give up hope and quit. So there's not really a good scenario for that. So that's one of the reasons also why this discussion is so difficult, because obviously philosophically, and with a lot of the things Pronogo's talking about, bringing in new maps and how you do it, and obviously even hypothetically the idea that maybe this map will get on way better when they see it in competitive play, but the actual, like, everyday reality of what Valve does with the maps is very underwhelming. I'll just say this. A lot of people might know FMP1, the guy who basically made Cash along with, like, he reworked the version that Volcano had made from Source, right? What a lot of people might not realise is, because he, for a long time, thought they were going to maybe let some more of his maps into the pool, because Cash was such a runaway success at one point in time. Basically, he did an interview with me on my channel. I'm going to guess it's maybe 3-4 years ago, in one of my Talk to Thorins. And in it, it's mad underwhelming. Because every time I sort of say, like, but how does someone get a map in the game? But why doesn't Valve ask this? He has to sort of, like, politely say, but not in as many words, like, I can't say that because if I do, Valve will destroy us. So we've now entered a world where Valve has become like that fucking Simpsons meme of, like, doing this, that's a paddling. Talking about paddling, that's a paddling. It's like, you can't ever, everything gets you wrecked. Like, we're in some sort of fucked up toxic relationship with Valve.
This is what will tilt so many people when they realize this. But over on my channel, I've done interviews with map makers, and they all openly talk about how they just have buddy conversations with Valve devs all the time. These fucking map makers, right? These community guys, in theory, are getting feedback like daily in some cases when their map is close to being finished. They've got a workshop version. They talk to Valve all the fucking time, and yet Valve doesn't do anything close to that. Like, when they explain this, I had to keep my composure in the interview, but I was like afterwards, I was like, are you serious? You guys talk to Valve like all the time? Like, are you sure you're not talking about a different company? Like, what the fuck?
Meanwhile, there are literal major winners who can't get Valve to listen to them.
Yeah.
Not to say they'd be right, but that's the other thing. I'm just saying reply to the email, be like, oh, we'll take it into account. Yeah, thanks.
Sure.
Or, send us any other thoughts you got.
What was hilarious is when there was a I forget the guy's name, unfortunately, I think John McDonald maybe. There was a Valve dev on Twitter who said, we read every email, something to that effect. So, hey, you know what, Thorin? Maybe that guy's right. Maybe he reads every single email and just responds to none of them. That might be true.
Are we going to switch topics?
Who thinks that Vertigo is going to be replaced with Tuscan?
I don't know that they would ever do there is one last topic
They're
I wanted to
working
talk
on
about.
it.
There is one last topic I wanted to talk about.
Brute is literally talking about it and posting about it regularly, talking about it's damn near finished and working with Valve.
The problem is, the problem with Ancient coming in is, and this would be a problem with Tuscan as well. Look at the time it's coming in. So people talk about how it's great to have a hands-off developer, but Valve are playing gods just like Riot play God, where they just changed the patch before Worlds. Oops, sorry, we just introduced
Take it back.
Picks, like whatever. Like, fuck it, look at this. Look at this. They've literally done the same thing. Half of the qualifications for the major championship are played on an old map that is being removed for the major. Like, this is ridiculous.
Wait, it's not. Wait, the
Ancient will
qualifications
be in the
are being played on one, and it will be in the major.
The next RMR, apparently.
RMRs will have Ancient instead of Train.
I don't. That new information that I do not like.
They literally just changed the map pool like a couple months, I guess 6 months maybe from the major, but also like you're qualifying on Train in some cases. You're getting points. They don't matter as much because they're not LAN, but these online RMRs are all going to be using Train. And then when we switch to LAN, as far as I know, we're going to Ancient. And
put it this way.
The same thing with Nuke.
They put it was worse than that. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Man.
Basically, they never ever take into account. It's nearly always like quite close to a major when they tend to introduce them. But no, the most egregious part of that is there are even certain teams, like to me, Virtus Pro is an obvious one, where like they might drop off massively because Train was an enormous part of their arsenal. Yeah. Even having someone banned against them was a big deal because it allowed them to get to where they wanted to in the middle of the map pool. So, like, even though I know people are trying to throw out some of the other big teams, like teams like Gambit will survive. Look, they can play a lot of the maps, but there's certain teams that were just so good on that map that Ancient will not replace what it did for them. It's just such an alien contrast that essentially this will affect, first of all, maybe they'll qualify if they've already got the points and then be bad at the major, or the other way around. Maybe they needed this map to be in the pool to qualify and now they won't have it.
Yeah, it's pretty insane, to be honest. Like, especially since I myself am another person who tries to give Valve the credit where the credit is due of not being so hands-on and not changing the map and not changing the balance, even though when they do, it's disastrous. Like, obviously, everybody likes to point out the Krieg and stuff. Like, these situations do show up, but they're much more rare than other developers, and you do get something closer to my home game of Brutal.
It's still the best dev, let's be real.
Yes.
Like, I know everyone cries because of... The problem is this, because Dota 2 exists, that will always be the comparison. Forget Dota 2. Compare it to the other League of Legends or the other. They're way better than those ones. Like I would rather still have Valve than playing League of Legends, where like that's the equivalent of if you woke up tomorrow and the AWP did half the damage.
Yes.
Yeah, and just wrecked everyone's careers. Like that's what League of Legends is like.
Or the sole purpose of doing that,
replacing it or something. Yeah, it's just absurd.
Yeah. The other thing that I really hate with dealing with dealing with Riot for over a decade is the community will feed them ideas that are really high quality ideas, like the practice tool. And then they'll just like Men in Black pen themselves and be like, guys, we've invented this thing that'll let you practice. And like, they're totally condescending in the way that they like add things. Like right now they're doing the same thing with Valorant with demos. And they're like trying to like keep it under the table. Like, guys, we have a surprise for you. We can't tell you, but it might be a replay system. It's like, well, fucking,
wait a minute. I wasn't actually aware of that. Does Valorant not have demos?
It doesn't have demos, man. That's where we're at.
Mate, this is one of the areas that I'm so sick of people in that game gaslighting everyone else about how good the game is.
Oh, it's
your motherfuckers don't even have demos.
Yeah.
No custom maps, no demos, no practice.
Yeah, exactly. The joke there is you aren't attracting players to your game. They're just fleeing our game. That's like saying that like that jumping out of a building's really good for your health because you will die if you stay in a burning building. No, like I just don't want to be in the burning building. Like jumping out's still going to be a big problem for me. That's mad. I've never even heard anyone mention that, mate. That is fucking mental.
Oh yeah, there's
I think War Owl's mentioned it a couple of times on his channel where he's like, I would love to make content around Valorant, but I can't because there's no demo viewer.
Love War Owl. Probably the most reasonable of the general Counter-Strike content creators I've found. Good guy.
100%.
And you know his channel's only a few clicks away.
Do we want to talk about Riot spontaneously deciding to record all, or well, I guess not necessarily all, but I guess we can assume that they're recording all.
It has to be all, yeah.
Voice chat for reports. Just brief, because I personally, as somebody who plays Valorant and is a critically thinking individual, has a serious problem with that just from, I know it can be exploited. And if it were Valve that were doing it, I would have a better opinion of it. But because it's Riot, it presents me with much conflict. And to a certain extent, I'm willing to accept it and continue playing it. But like the cognitive dissonance is huge. And I'm absolutely willing to admit that. It's just, I don't like it.
But
I still play it.
Jump off on that. One of the things that I've been thinking about is what's kind of annoying too with Riot is they put a lot of behavioral stuff before developmental stuff. As we were just saying, they don't have demos right now, but they're working on the behavioral system for reports surveillance. Yeah, which it's like their priorities are not straight at all, or from like the...
Is that what they call it? Is it actually called surveillance?
No, but that's what it is. They're...
Oh, right, sorry. I thought that was like actually their like code name.
It's a genuine question when it comes to Riot.
It could be, yeah. Listen, Riot would be so ridiculous. They might even just call it that. Yeah, exactly.
They may. Toxicity surveillance. They'd put something before it to make it sound like it's worth doing.
No, I guess...
keep going, Eddie.
Yeah, to set the kind of... structure for this, like where do we have any other comparisons of games that have said that they record voice communications for reporting reasons? Is that a standard, or is this something new that they are implementing in their own games?
I only know esports, but I've never heard of it in a single esports game. Like, put it this way, you never in a million, you could say every word under the sun, you will never be banned from CSGO for saying it, as far as I know. Because they don't even record the experience.
Yeah.
They don't even record the
knows when you report for text abuse and voice abuse in CSGO, nothing happens.
Okay.
You might get voice muted if you get a lot of them, but good luck.
Now in Overwatch, that isn't the case. Overwatch, they do to some degree of that, but I don't know how they go about that. If it's just a threshold of reports of voice things, and then they just, because they also have what League has with like an honor system, where if you fall below an average of the baseline of the community, like whatever the level is, you just get put in low priority queue. You get like
it's like a prisoner's island type scenario. Yeah. Sure.
So I think League has also done that in the past. If they still actively do that, I imagine Valorant's going to also want to do that. Now, I'm of two opinions. If they're only recording the audio that is put into the team chat for, whoever is in your solo queue game, it's one thing. It's another if they're recording, like if you have push activation, or if they're just recording audio in general and have access to that. That's like a breach of privacy. But I think if you're going to say something within a solo queue game, within random people on your team, that might as well be the public square to some degree, and you should be accountable for what's said in that, especially, if you're being super hostile or super toxic. I don't think that it should be every single thing being recorded, but I'm definitely in contention mentally still with weighing that.
I do want to jump in on this because this is something that I'm a developer. Like I deal with like people's really sensitive data, like credit cards, social security numbers. Like I've dealt with all that stuff, right? And I really don't like the distraction from the conversation of like a privacy perspective, like not to deploy maximum cynicism, but I'm going to deploy maximum cynicism to set the stage. There is no privacy, right? Like we're using, a chat program. Like there is no privacy. It's privately hosted. We don't own the software. We don't know what's going on. That's dead, right? Okay. So if there is no privacy, then what are they doing? Like let's try and interpret what they're doing with that data. So at least we can get a sense of like, are they doing the right thing with the data? Well, if you think about what the target towards toxicity is, like obviously toxicity is such a nuanced subject. It is almost silly to try and combat it. But what does it really do when you go to target toxicity? It is targeting the pain that other people playing video games experience and say, look, we're doing something about it. Whether you actually do something about it or not is irrelevant, but it looks
it's performative
like
to some degree.
Something. Yes, it is.
It's arbitrary.
And that also kind of draws the line of like, you know, it's a very interesting comparison if you think about the U.S. politics. Riot and Valve are two extremes, similar to the two parties in the United States are two extremes, right? No matter what we do, we are but pawns to do as what they want to do be done. You know, they're going to make money. We are but the lambs going to consume from one river or the other, right? And, you know, this is Riot's strategy of saying, hey, look, you guys have had a couple of bad matches on Face It. We know that in the North American scene, playing on Counter-Strike is like putting a gun to your head and going, maybe I'll pull the trigger today, right? We can do something about it over here in Valorant. We're recording everyone's audio. There's no way that guy who was screaming at you because
you think it's also related to like Counter-Strike, for example. It's a way to draw more fans over.
Well, they've done everything else with every other feature that people want in Counter-Strike. So
I haven't heard anybody asking for
sense.
this in Counter-Strike, though, because I feel like
I've never heard of it.
I've never heard anybody.
You've heard people bitching about toxicity in Counter-Strike. That's basically ubiquitous.
I think something though that this is probably, if I had to look into the future, like looking into like some sort of like, you know, magic crystal ball, I think in a few months what's going to end up happening is it's going to be more. It's going to be like more like YouTube, where there's going to be some sort of AI listening for keywords. Yeah. And then it's going to be because of the whole, well, it is terrifying because if you think about who owns Riot and where they, you know, where their bread is buttered, there's going to be certain things that you might say or the system might think you said that is going to be within their whatever filter of words that is going to be like, oh, well, if you get reported for verbal and this word or this phrase was said, you're flagged and you're banned. And then you're knowing Riot, their customer service isn't great, especially when you get verbal bans or chat bans. I've never had experience with that, but I know people who have where, you know, like they're not even flaming. They're just saying light things like, you know, somebody's flaming in chat and they just say, you're an idiot. And then they mute them. Now, I think Riot has like a lot of faux honesty when it comes to this sort of culture that they're trying to get in their games versus the one that they have as a company, because, you know, they have this like bro culture where, you know, they're literally farting on employees, sexual assault, history of that kind of misconduct. But then they're trying to make an angel or heaven-like area for their games, which we just need mutes. We need a report system that works, and, you know, just give us the other things that we can do to play your game without having to play your game. Like, let's get the demos out of the way. Let's have some more customizable options within custom games to enable teams to practice, to enable teams to scrim more efficiently. Like right now, like they've given us like we're trying to like cook in the kitchen and they keep giving us garden tools. It's like, come on, like we're trying to make a meal, not fucking, you know, till the ground. So I don't know.
To me, the big problem I have with this whole topic is, unlike a lot of other things, like obviously there's just minor tweaks in balance and meta things in the game that make, you know, everyone on Reddit lose their mind, every pro player lose their mind, go crazy about stuff. You know, even things about the league partnership program could be enormous scandals. This actually wasn't that big a scandal, I've noticed. And part of the reason why is quite a depressing one, really, which is, it's kind of alluding to what I said before, the phenomenon where people just will find a way to rationalize and make whatever is happening their new baseline. And that phenomenon has already played out. Basically, that horse bolted from the stable a long time ago on personal privacy. Like, people don't care that literally a foreign government is probably listening to you if you have a certain app on your phone. I get those ones all the time that are not just like coincidences or like synchronicities where like literally I don't use the phone to talk about this. The phone is in my pocket and I talk to someone in real life about something I need that I've never talked about ever. And then that is the next Instagram ad, or that is the next Twitter thing that I get. Like the level of spying is nuts. And unfortunately, the sophistry of that angle of But if you haven't got anything to hide, that's the problem. That works on most people. That really does get through to a lot of people. They actually think that's like good logic. Whereas I have to say, if you know anything about the way the world was, say, like 100 years ago, it was the other way around. Like, people were more like how I am. Like, I'll give you an example. If I'm coming to go down a road and a construction guy says, why are you going down this road? Like, do you live down here? I will just say, who are you? And if they go, well, do you need to go down this road or not? I say, establish who you are first. Who are you? Are you a policeman? Do you have some sort of authority? If they can't establish who they are with a name and their role, I'm not going to listen to this guy. Now, another person might go, why not just get along with him? Because that's actually how you end up in tyranny, mate. You end up in a world where people who have no rights over you exert those rights. And the last thing you want is corporations exerting these rights. It's bad enough if the CIA or NSA is spying on you. The idea fucking companies in other countries are going to do it. Like, again, there's no point going down that whole tangent, but like I say, unfortunately, I feel like the horse has already bolted from the stable on that one, and we're just trying to shut the door after the fact, you know. If people are going to accept that with life, they're not really going to get that mad about a video game, unfortunately. It's just more like hardcore purists like us.
And I will tell you,
I've had a manager give me basically that conversation of when they started putting they put cameras in the break rooms and they put cameras in some of the main causeways between the coops. And I expressed my issues with it. And he said, if you've got nothing to hide, what are you worried about? And my confidence, so my feeling of security goes so far as I can throw my confidence in their ability to do the right thing with the information that they're being given. Cameras volunteer so goddamn much. And if anybody wants to look for a problem, if they've got 24-hour surveillance, they can find it. They can find it in intonation in an email if they want it to. So that's just no. If you have nothing to hide, everybody has something to hide. And even then, there's just shit they don't want people to know. And that's not something that needs to be volunteered, for the hell of it.
And that's something too, that it's so hard to escape. I'm a software guy. I play around with a lot of cool different things. And one of the things that is almost impossible to escape is your phone. Your phone is constantly ratting on you, whether you want it to or not, especially with some of the things that include pre-installed apps and things like that. And to escape that world is to sacrifice your connection to the world. Now, there are ways to escape it, but I will tell you right now, I have done it, and it is incredibly inconvenient and destroys all of the convenience that you get. Imagine a world where you have to interact with software and don't have the Google Play Store to install apps. That's everything. No Gmail, no Chrome browser. You get nothing. No notifications, no text messaging. You have to build your own text messaging. That is incredibly inconvenient, which is why I say, no, listen, privacy's dead. Unless you're running a Linux phone, unless you're running a Linux operating system, unless you have friends who are also doing that, just give up. Just call it a day. Do your best, try and keep your information limited. But as long as you are willing to consume any kind of information or take part in any kind of conversation with people who you would never meet before, then you just pack it up, but get that argument out of my yard, because it's gone already.
That's basically, you can even do it with computers. In reality, even those of us who say we care about it on this issue, we're just doing the whole conservative angle of okay, just stop. Okay, now stop. Just stop there, though. You can go all the rest of the way, but just stop there, though. Because in reality, the fact any of us run Windows is ludicrous. It's never been a good operating system. But we run it because it's the easiest way to then run the game that you want, or play a game with someone, or if people don't know, they used to bring nearly all the big games like Quake and Counter-Strike out onto Linux. But unless you essentially did the thing where you emulate a Windows box, essentially if you wanted the real Linux version, you used to have to wait 3 years before they brought the game out. So realistically, you can't be the cutting edge gamer and do that. So unfortunately, basically in a million areas we've already compromised so much. I agree. That philosophical discussion, it's fun. I notice, again, it's kind of where you can see where people are at in their political mindscape. If they've never had that conversation before, it's a brilliant conversation for an 18-year-old. For the rest of us, it's sort of it's true, but we're not going to do anything about it. Let's be real. We're not going to be the resistance. We're just going to go, grumble, and then just get recorded, aren't we?
I do think that the access that they have to your PC is a bigger concern, and nobody seems to have died on that
kernel level.
realm. Yeah, the fact that they have a ring 0, whatever it is, a kernel level anti-cheat that apparently is a skeleton, but you expect me to install this to play your shitty CS version.
The problem is though, like that's the other black pill about the cheating topic, mate. Realistically, by definition, you can't ever catch really good cheats because they were just made. Therefore, you haven't got a sample to make your fucking anti-cheat from. So the only way you can actually catch them is basically like the police, if they couldn't catch someone who hasn't done the crime yet, doing an illegal wiretap. That's what those kernel level access are. Like the joke is, supposedly ESEA didn't really find that people were actually cheating. They found them admitting it, and then from that so it's the equivalent of me going, yeah, and I stashed the gun in the river, and then I go to the river and find it. It's like, listen, you sort of found the gun, but you didn't really, did you? Because you shouldn't have had the first information, and obviously in a court setting, that would be considered an admissible potentially. If you know some of the stories about, like searching backs of cars and stuff.
And if you don't think, like, when I watched the Valorant, like, the actual anti-cheat Vanguard announcements of, like, all of the feature functionality that it provided and all of this, spoiler, if you ever see AI mentioned anywhere, bullshit. It's all bullshit. Like,
of course, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
You know, because, I mean, like, AI is, like, if you want to talk about, like, some of the most overused. Like, I have written
far from
artificial intelligence as software. I've written the software. Like
no, but the joke is it's not actually even intelligence. They tend to just mean a brute force method using like simple patterns.
Yes, and if you look at how Riot has enforced it, it's literally like we've got guys on the phone whenever people call and like, oh, hey, I think this guy's cheating. All right, got it. AI deployed.
I think
that's some Elon Musk level shit. That's pretty clever, actually. I didn't even know they were doing the phone angle.
It's
what a
like the kernel level thing. I have literally heard my own voice from and I'm assuming their VoIP goes through Vanguard because A, the quality of the VoIP in game, and B, the fact that when they had their issue a little while ago that made every mic live. I would get into game lobby, whether people were using push to talk or not. I was hearing their words. It got out of a match, closed the game. For 45 seconds afterwards, I was still hearing their communications. I'm assuming that's going through Vanguard. Other times I've come into the game and heard things that I've said testing my mic previous. That scares the fuck out of me.
It doesn't go through Vanguard. Actually, I can kind of chime in because the way that League works, the League voice chat is ran as a separate process, I believe, from the League client. So I've had that before too, where it's kind of like a lag thing. It's definitely not with Vanguard. It might be just the way that they like set up the processes with the application. Because like if
the behavior's still strange though.
Yeah, it is strange because I've had that before where you get done with a League game, you're in League chat, which is awful in of itself. But you get out, and then there's kind of like no client, no screen. You still hear voices, and it's like, what the hell? Like, but
what else are they hearing?
Could be. Are we still
the other problem though as well, to be fair, is this is also why sadly if you bring this up, people actually fight mentally against it. When you say we have to smash the hegemony of IP rights that are held at the moment, they hear like remove all property rights, free the press. Like, no one believes that. Like, obviously not that ridiculous. All I'm saying is like make it within bounds. Like, make it like a real life object. The analogy everyone always gives is a good one. Like, the person who invented the soccer ball doesn't get a fucking royalty for every match of soccer ever played and decide which games can and cannot be played. But the problem is, similar to that, because so many of those terms of services haven't been tested in a court of law by people who had the real motivation and backing to battle them. At the moment, those terms of services, half of them wouldn't even hold up in court. Half of them are like giving you a piece of paper that says, I promise to do everything Thorin says forever or he can kill me. And then you sign it and I go, but signed it. So that wouldn't fucking hold up in court. That's a ridiculous contract. It doesn't even have compensation. Like a million factors don't exist within that. So similarly, right? You'll notice fans repeat the words terms of service like they were saying, but that was in the 10 Commandments written by God. Like, they think if it's in the TOS, you have to do it. But I will say, at the moment when it hasn't been tested, it may as well be the 10 Commandments. We have all opted into everything they're doing. I'll bet even when, I don't know specifically for Valorant, but you know, that's the reason why half the time when your app updates, it makes you do the TOS again. Because it's just put something else in the TOS that you're saying yes to. And in doing so, like, I'll tell you the way the world works, without getting too esoteric, is the second you give your consent, you're now partially responsible for what happens. Even if you consider it unfair or I didn't know or whatever. Like, again, it's like court. Ignorance isn't an excuse, unfortunately. So as soon as you give your consent, which we're all doing by playing the game and clicking that yes on the TOS, we're sort of like, we've already made our deal with the devil, unfortunately. So we can't really then, like we'd like to, push back. Because again, if people don't know, we don't own any of these games. They can delete the game off our PC, ban us anytime they want.
Yeah. And there's some movements that are trying to smash that hegemony, as you put it, but
sure,
they are far from.
We're too far away. Yeah. Basically, that's why I've actually said to me, esports could be one of them. Because the idea is when esports is like a multi-billionaire sport where, like, you know, just a game like League can generate billions of... If we ever get to that point in time, then you'll have the massive class action type suits where, it's probably not even the right terminology, but basically like group suits where the idea is you'll be able to argue that, you know, your performance is what generates the income, not the game itself. And that's where it'll start getting interesting. But put it this way, the kind of people you'd need on board aren't even thinking about that, I can tell you. It's not even on their radar, you know.
And if you think about it too, like maybe you get it to like a court. Well, if you're going to go challenge right, you're going to go to a Los Angeles court, which is incredibly lenient to IP rights. And even if you go to take it to the Supreme Court isn't here in any case. Like there are Second Amendment cases that they're like, nah, I think we'll pass on that.
There's bigger cases than that they've ignored, but that conversation for a different time.
Right. Like, so, I mean, like, you know, it may be like, maybe there's some theoretical legal battle that can be won, but oh boy, I wouldn't be, you know, staking my claim on that. You know, I wouldn't be.
And also,
of that,
like,
right?
If people don't know, it's a sad reality that, like, unless actually, funnily enough, something like the Second Amendment is actually one of the rare examples where like a normal pleb could potentially win against a massive force. If you're in the kind of like more commercial world we're talking about, the person with the most money, time, and motivation is the one that wins that case. So I don't want to go put it this way, I don't want to play a game, you know, in the game Rounders, where when he was playing poker, even though when you play obviously like a tournament in No Limit, you know, if I have $100 and you have 1,000, I go all in. You go all in rather. I can just put my 100 in and we see the cards, right? And then you take everything back except the 100 if you lose. Well, the problem is in the same way as in Rounders, he's playing a cash game. So if the other guy puts 40 grand in, doesn't matter if you have the winning hand, you've got to put 40 grand in and match the bet, right? That's what some of these legal cases are like. So the last thing you want to do is take all of your money in the world and have a race for who's got the most money with Tencent. Like, they're going to smash you on that one just to make a fucking point. It's not even about, you know, whether they might even care about the issue. Like, they're just going to bankrupt you, mate. They're just going to make it run forever. They're going to make the costs insane. And if you lose, God forbid that, then you might have to pay them fucking $2 million or something ridiculous, you know, for their legal case. So it's a losing battle on that one. Do we have another topic? Maybe flip to like one last big topic if someone has one.
Yeah, I had one. Oh, go ahead,
for it, Eddie.
No, it's okay.
No, okay. I want to talk about, I watched your Adren video recently. I want to talk about the value of, and what I assume Adren to be is more so a morale coach than anything. I feel like he's somebody that the majority of Liquid enjoys and gets along with and can rally them to a certain point, or at least focus them, because I don't even know that he has a super psychological impact on morale. But for some reason, they were more resilient under Adren, even though he never called timeouts to console them or do anything of that sort. But what value does basically somebody that the team can trust and rally behind have versus a tactical or strategic mastermind in a regimented, you know, system versus what Adren offers in more a personality / morale aspect?
I mean, because the coach can't talk every round, you always have to ask the corollary question, which is, who is your in-game leader? So if your in-game leader is Fallen hasn't shown any inclination ever that he wanted a coach. I've basically heard from some people behind in the scenes, he didn't even want some of the people like Zeus back necessarily. He never cared. But this way, I love the way, this is another example. Like, it's bad enough when I already know the players, but maybe you don't know that I know the players. One of my best friends in all of Counter-Strike for like 15 years is like one of the main people in the Immortals group. So the idea that I'm making these stories up, I know what I'm talking about on these ones. These are corroborated beyond the rumours, you know. So like, I don't think Fallen particularly wants an IGL. So in some ways, it might be the perfect coach for him. It might just be someone who's everyone else likes, just stays out of the way generally. As far as I can tell, the strength of Adren is exactly what he was popular with as a streamer. He's good at explaining stuff to the layman. And I'll tell you what, some of their players aren't that smart. Maybe they need things explained very simply.
They can aim, but their brains...
You know? Whereas the sense I got was the people that you would want, if you wanted them to be tactical and all that, or even resilient in that sense, they're the sorts of people that some of those players would bristle against, that they wouldn't necessarily want.
Yeah, and let me put it this way. Like, I feel like Adren is probably the best thing for Fallen to bring in, right? Okay, sure. Like, let's say he can bring back some of the ideology that brings Liquid back to the next level, right? That's what everyone is thinking right now. Oh, Adren, he was the guy that led them to championship stuff. Oh, boy, like, we're going right back up. Now, what if they don't? Oh, well, they won't. Guess who's got to go? Maybe we need another coach, right? Now, because for the morale thing, for me, I see Fallen running morale like a champ, right? Because he's a charismatic guy. Like, he has got the energy to even, again, I don't know these players, right? Like, I just see what I see and kind of like make assumptions about behavior and things like that, right? Even despite the massive cynicism that looks like drowns that team out, I think he can overcome that, because there's just something about Brazilian energy that's just like, it gets you fired up. True. Even in the most cynical of times, right?
In the worst of ways sometimes.
Covered. Yeah, and I think that's covered, right? Now, sure, maybe there's some tactics that Adren can bring back in, and maybe they do go to the moon. Who knows, right? But there's definitely a cynical angle of like, well, if they don't, we know who's going. Right? Like, it's definitely not a player for sure.
It's actually one of the reasons why all my mates who were in talent, who went to become coaches, didn't think it through. Because that's an even bigger reason that what you will end up as a beard. Because here's the thing, right? If they have a guy, like, I'll give you an example. Think of the coach of Fnatic, this guy Samuelsson. You've almost never seen him on media. You don't even know who the guy is. You just know he's a Swedish guy. He sort of looks a bit like Olaf Meister. And did he do a good job? I mean, maybe. They didn't really play like an uber tactical team, but okay. And what did Golden do? So you know what? Usually, a guy like that, he can skate by for a long, long time. Keep your head down. The org knows you. Maybe the org brought you in. So you've kind of got like some social proof there, right? If you come in and you're Yanko, you're Moses, as you're saying and alluding to here, brilliant beard, because the second we need to fire someone, they're such huge names, they were already being scrutinised every second of the day anyway. So as the moment you're losing, players almost don't even have to do it. The fans will ask for those guys to be fired. So I agree. It's a classic move if you're in-game leader to do that. Like, that's the real reason I think Fallen let some of these people be his coach. It was to cynically basically say, like, you know what? You can't hurt things, because if I don't like what you're doing anyway, I'm just not going to do it in the game. If you add something, great, maybe that can work. And if not, you just get fired instead of people noticing I've done fuck all for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, because there's no way he's going to bring in someone like Valens, who is just like a data-driven guy who may be the most ideal coach, right? I think he's like doing retired or something, or maybe some job with Cloud or something. I'm not sure. Right. So, there's no way like someone like Valens, or even someone like Peacemaker, who is just, I'm here to be the coach and not be a public figure. These are like bred coaches, right? That don't have like a giant reputation to be staked career when they go to this team, right? Like, it seems way too convenient that they just go, what's all Adren been doing? Has he been going and playing MDL? Well, that's nice. Come on back. Come on, bring it back. Let's roll back the years, right? Oh, we can't roll back the years. Bloody hell. Guess we just gotta replace the coach, huh?
That's why it originates with the players, really. Because I can't imagine anybody but the players saying, hey, the last time we were decent was under Adren.
Right, because
the problem is, like, I'll tell you a little bit about how the relationships in most team orgs. Most team orgs still run off a premise where, like, it depends who your general manager is. Most teams don't even still to this day have like a true general manager. It's usually like the owner. Like, for example, Nazgul in Team Liquid, the guy who made Team Liquid, is literally the guy who decides who joins in CSGO. But does he decide though? That's the question. What I would suggest is he goes to someone he trusts. An obvious example would probably be Elige, I'm guessing, on this team. And all you need to know is, even the way he would speak would tell you immediately that this is not a normal sport setup, because he wouldn't go, well, Elige, you know, you've been performing well, so what kind of... He would go, hey, John, like, you know, what kind of car would you like to... It's immediately a personal relationship. So basically, inadvertently, someone like Elige, they can even do the Nico. They can claim, but I just gave my input and, you know, they made the decision. But it's like, really, you could essentially be the puppet master if you were very shrewd with how you manipulated the owner. And the owner will tend to have one or two people that he just banks on like that and he trusts, at least up until the point he doesn't, in which case they get fired. And they will just ride kind of whatever the sentiment of that player is, typically.
Yeah, and it goes to like a management thing that's, you know, generally across the whole board, which is a problem that plagues management is management can't be honest with the employees and the employees can't be honest to management.
Of course.
You know, so
yes.
there's a relationship there that predisposes I cannot be honest with you at the threat of this relationship, which puts my job at threat. Right.
I mean, there's a lot of very famous concepts that come from the military, obviously, where essentially the premise is like communication is effectively impossible except between equals. And so when you're in a stratified system like you're describing, like how could you as my boss ever be totally honest with me as an employee in a scenario where the very premise of we're in different positions means we cannot access the same information or be privy to the same information or even actually really know what each other's thinking. Like imagine a negotiation where we both could read each other's minds. It won't be a negotiation, will it? It'll just be a mind war.
I've had situations where my boss has come into basically information.
No, go ahead.
Who's going? Oh, I've got like when I was in the coops, when I was doing more hard labor, basically my boss came into information I didn't realize he had. Essentially, he peeked into the attic and saw that I was sitting down on a little break and on my phone, which I wasn't supposed to have. He pulled me into an office later on and basically, you know, he put me through this self-test of integrity and had me list, you know, different aspects and where I thought I fell on that. He was essentially asking me to rat myself out, which is not something I could let myself do, because if there was a chance of me getting out of that situation with my job, I was going to do that. And to this day, he still gives me crap about it because obviously I'm still here. But there was no way I was going to tell him. There was no way I was going to cop up to it because I didn't. As long as I have the right to not self-incriminate, as long as I have any doubt that he knows, I'm not going to tell him the honest truth.
And this is why I have like,
that's just business.
And this is why I have admiration for the French scene, you know, because there were so many French shuffles because somebody just didn't get along with somebody. And it was very, very apparent, right? Like there was no question. Not really a big fan of you, Apex. Like we got to go. This is something's going to have to happen right here. Because let's theorize. Elige is going in to talk to Nazgul and goes, you know, like, how you doing, Nazgul? Oh, I'm doing good. So how's the team going right now? And you know the team's falling apart. Who do you rat out? One of the players who can then put you on the outside of a roster move, or do you rat out the coach? Like, you know, like it's those kind of political situations is one of the fundamental issues of like why we can't get to the root causes of issues, where it's like, okay, well, this person is bringing a particular aspect of the team down, but I can't be honest with that with the people who are making the decisions because I may be on the outside and putting myself at risk by extension. You know, like it's such a... You
can also obviously have the phenomenon where you shoot the messenger. Like, let's face it, who is going to tell you about problems you have in your game? The teammate who told the coach privately he has an issue with this, or the coach that's telling you there's a problem with your game, mate? So what you might think is, right, really, the only problem is what you have, mate, so I'm going to get you fired. But what you might not know is maybe 3 of your teammates told him to say that. That's why these interpersonal relationships in like coach and team is so complicated. And obviously, we're all just speculating from the outside. You know, we're just like coming up with whatever angles we are. This is just water cooler talk, really. It's fine. Like, if you notice, I'm one of the few people who doesn't think, like, you can't have these conversations. You don't know anything. It's like, no, of course you can. It's actually the entire premise that keeps our fucking industry alive, you idiot. But the point is, you just always take it with a grain of salt what your own thoughts are, you know. As I try to.
For the sake of pontificating.
Yeah.
Right,
you gotta have
Eddie.
some entertainment, right?
Eddie, what was your point? Do you remember it, mate?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do this last one then. Come on.
Sure. So one of the things that I've been doing recently is I've been going around and watching Valorant VODs from the different regions. And one of the things that I found that was interesting is China's been doing a lot of Valorant tournaments. And from what I've seen from researching CSGO the week prior, there wasn't a lot of Asian representation in Counter-Strike. So I wasn't sure if, how much experience there was with that region in the game. That being said, watching the Korean and Chinese teams play Valorant, it was rather interesting because some things that I had taken for a given watching the European League and the North American League of kind of a slow, structured, information-based approach kind of was thrown out the window, almost in a similar fashion that in Chinese League of Legends would be the case, where, in solo queue, they kind of expect you, like, we're having a fight. If you're a scaler or if you're fucking early game champ, don't care, be here, be square kind of thing. And they were doing almost a very similar fashion where Chinese teams were having this aggressive CT position where they were like rushing out on pistol rounds and almost doing like terrorist hunt style play, which was really fascinating. I was wondering, maybe in Counter-Strike or in other games of StarCraft, is there ever been a new representation from a region that came with a unique style of play that was maybe jarring to the scene?
I think
not really in
Taiwu
terms of
coming in.
Yeah, go on.
Like them coming onto the scene, like they shocked people. I still remember their plays on Cobblestone, their B-holds, and essentially there was a certain reservedness with their CT play, and then the same on the opposite of the spectrum, aggressiveness with their T play. And something that was interesting with them was they, counter to what Europe did and what NA did, they had just absurd sensitivities. And you could tell just like from their play style and the way that they played that they kind of learned CSGO in a vacuum of China because of the representation. Like, we didn't have Perfect World until several years after CSGO started. So we didn't have like full on adoption of CSGO in China for a while.
There still isn't. But it's still comparatively a very small game.
Yeah. But I think Taiwu is the best example of coming on and just shocking the scene with a totally different play style. Like I said, learning CS in a vacuum and just catching people off guard.
The problem is that wasn't anything calculated. That was essentially, I'd say my analogy, that's bird strike. A bird can take down a 747, but a bird is not a 747.
Yep.
All it can do is take down the 747, maybe, if it hits it in the right mode. By the way, if it hits it in the wrong mode, it just dies in the engine on its own. So it's just fucked in that scenario. Basically, what you're describing, I know that seemed like it was counterintuitive, actually makes perfect sense. If you come from a scene where everyone on T side doesn't understand the meta of European structured Counter-Strike, and even what we call loose play, by the way, to them would have been considered structure. Essentially, people are just sort of like, to use a StarCraft analogy, like zergling, rushing spots, etc. If people do that, then logically on CT side, you're never going to play aggressively and try and fill holes because you're going to think you're going to run into a guy holding an AK on the corner coming at your face. So you're going to play very passively on CT side inside the sites. Probably the best example of this was when they used to play the map Cache. They had no idea whatsoever about how to play that A site. They just didn't understand it whatsoever. They didn't understand the meta, when you rotate, when you push, how you use the utility. They would just sit there and try and take a gunfight. And then on T side, yeah, basically they used to all just rush. And then if you want to know the part about the sensitivity, there's actually a very logical reason for that, which is one of the reasons why Counter-Strike will never be a big game in China. It's because they didn't understand the publishing to the PC cafes. And if you go into a PC cafe, it's the reason why, another reason low-key that a lot of people don't understand why League of Legends is a massive game. Because you can play League of Legends with any mouse. You don't even need to change the mouse sensitivity. You just get used to it, and it's probably going to be decent enough. That'll be like 80% of playing a game. If you play a game of Counter-Strike with literally a $1 cost mouse inside a PC cafe, you're not going to have a super low sensitivity like Nico and an enormous mouse pad. And like, first of all, the mouse couldn't even handle it. And then secondly, you've just spent your whole life playing games that weren't like super mechanically challenging. And so you're used to like a high sense wrist aiming style. So basically they all have that approach generally, I've noticed. Like you can even see just from the way that they move in the game. So unfortunately, they're coming at it from such an alien perspective. It actually shows how the scenes do influence each other and how having people who can like directly help you apply knowledge is so key. Because even though in theory, you would think in parallel, shouldn't they develop similarly? They didn't really. That's what's weird. That's why the most interesting one is always Korea, because China tends to just be a brute force thing. Once they hit a certain threshold of number of players, which then translates into money injection into the scene, they just will become good enough eventually, not least because effectively, like, they could just get, like, not literally on the simple level, but they could just get 5 mental aimers, and maybe that can help match up, you know. And they've just got so many players, if it's like League of Legends, that you can build a style out of that. Contrasted with that is always Korea, because Korea's obviously got a smaller population, but it's if they're all getting into the game. If they all get into the game, then they will bring over the kinds of people who broke down StarCraft, and they will absolutely formalize all the concepts of Counter-Strike, and they will build concepts on top of each other, and they will just teach every new player by rote exactly how to play the game. Now, interestingly enough, this was always my speculation, much like I actually think in the modern day you see with League of Legends, and you always saw with Dota, which never really had the same amount of Koreans. I actually think games that are very open in terms of creativity, like Dota, like League, let's say post Season 7, and like Counter-Strike, I don't think actually that they would lead to overt Korean dominance in the way that the other games, like the old school League of Legends and StarCraft did, because those older games were a lot more like a flowchart how the game played. And so essentially, if you were the A student who just learned everything by rote, you would be the best if you also had good skills. The thing about some of the modern day games, and particularly Counter-Strike, it's one of the reasons why actually I think it's so sad, because if anyone followed Counter-Strike up until 2018, they'll know all the other experts who weren't me used to tell you, like, actually, these sorts of tactical styles, like an MSL or an Existence, they're outdated ways of playing the game, you know. The game now is about individual players playing off cues and everyone understanding what to do in that situation. And you know, teams like Fnatic, like FaZe Clan, like G2, these are the teams that, you know, they pioneer the new style. Now everyone, of course, will just tell you Astralis reached the peak of the game because, as an outlier, they were the best team and they were very tactical. But I've always thought, personally, the big what if for me goes like this. There's two. What if Olofmeister never bizarrely left in a way he has never explained to this day around the spring into the summer of 2018? Secondly, if he never left and FaZe Clan never had any kind of a drop-off or change of fortunes, and they'd won that major, say they get one more round against Cloud9, if Carrigan stays and they have faith in him, that's the matchup I want to see in history. I want to see the proper Carrigan FaZe Clan with all those players and that loose style against the peak Astralis. Because I tell you right now, a lot of people don't know how many times even the Nico FaZe Clan beat Astralis. They have a lot of wins over them, guys. I'm talking about peak Astralis. So that would have been a very... Because what makes Counter-Strike great is there is no one style that is the best. It's all about your players, their players, what the current meta, what maps are in the pool. Like, what makes Counter-Strike a beautiful game really is, it is like a true sport in that regard. There will always be different styles of play. There's not really one dominant style, whereas there's years in League of Legends where there was just one better way to play, and if you couldn't play that way, you would not win. It was impossible almost.
Yes, 100%. And that's one of the main reasons why I was attracted to Counter-Strike anyway, coming from Brood War, where that kind of style is very, as you said, rote in some ways. As somebody who tried to follow the distinct styles, you kind of get a feel over the course of years, over the course of players' careers in that game, about how essentially the way that these play styles evolve over time is mostly, it's like forced almost or guaranteed because of the map pool changes. In Counter-Strike, you could go stretches of time with no map pool changes or no significant meta changes in some other way, and you would still get that change, which was really interesting coming from Brood War, where it was almost like a foregone conclusion you would get the change in play style. In CS, you can get that without any attention from an outside developer, which in some ways makes it even more robust as a sport than StarCraft was, because obviously you did have to have some outside force, even if it wasn't the developer necessarily, but somebody making maps in order to change the meta and in order to innovate in the same way. So I always thought that was one of the best elements of Counter-Strike, and hopefully it's something that can endure even with this map pool that we're about to suffer through.
Suffer through.
I
think
Listen,
it's a
I have
nice,
to cast
refreshing
on Ancient.
change.
I can't even see the map.
I'm
for one, I'm excited about Ancient. To be honest with you, I think it's an interesting map, but
I just like stirring the pot.
Yeah.
That's basically it. Not like R8 levels of stirring the pot, but I like seeing change just because it forces different behaviors out of teams. And I feel like Valve undervalues their own, strength / ability of being able to, knock world champion Astralis out of the running with a map change, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Or into world championship status, for that matter.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that historically Astralis have lucked out in that respect. It's a close device with the map pool permabans. So it's actually worked in their favor.
And especially with weapon balancing, let's not talk about the Krieg.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, but kind of going back to the the Asian area, kind of coming into CS:GO, it's interesting that the really Tyloo and like MVP PK was a team for a short stint, but I mean it basically took Bentet talking 3 languages, trying to tie all of the all of the Asianic decent players to actually break into any kind of major relevance, right? That is the network of manipulation that had to be done to get a competitive team into the major arena, right? It's
Bentet's a blessing.
Man.
Put it this way, one of the reasons why, a lot of you might not know this, but even though on camera we are actually very I think we have a very good chemistry, me and Sponge. And certainly, if I meet him in a green room, he's a very good guy to talk to. He can banter. He's generally a very reasonable guy. I've never had any actual direct beef with him. There will always be an underlying tension between me and him. Because if you didn't watch the years when he was actual in-game leader, I flamed the fuck out of him repeatedly. And one of the reasons why is because, put it this way, just go and look how many times he lost the Asian minor to Tyloo. And we're talking about sometimes when they didn't even have Bentet. And it's to me, it was mate, if you have this tactical knowledge, either your teammates are absolute trash. By the way, spoiler, some of them weren't. JKS and Isaac were always pretty good players. And even some of the others were underrated. I always thought Still was an half-decent player. But the other thing is, mate, you're not the guy who comes from Europe and plays them once. And it's fuck, I've never played this. What are they doing? They're in the wrong spots and they killed me. You're playing them all the time, and they're your main rival. If you can't figure them out and beat them, I've got my questions about whether you can apply that knowledge. It's all well and good having theories, but in the actual game, can you do it? That was one of the reasons why there will always be an underlying tension there. Because the problem is, as much as now he is an analyst and he wants to think he's not, the wounds never heal for some pro players. You have to understand, because understandably, they almost experience trauma from it, and the worst thing is, unfortunately, in the modern world, when you say something, there will be a legion of people who just repeat that, whether they understood what you were talking about anyway. And then unfortunately, it's very easy when you're the victim of that, which is a horrible experience, to think it's them doing it to me. That's why people don't understand the very clear distinction between a player just having an opinion and when 3 Clicks Philip essentially was sending people towards us. I always make a clear distinction there. I'll never say you're sending your fan. I only do that if you really did send them. If you go this way, pitchforks available on the way. That one's just too blatant there. So the problem is, it's never really actually worked, in my opinion, the whole Asian approach, because they just never had the numbers, and as a result, unfortunately, the obvious black pill is all the good players go into the other games. They're all in League of Legends, mate, or depending on what country we're from. I mean, I will say the interesting detail to me was, obviously, everyone was trying to hype that Vision Strikers team, which has obviously very famous 1.6 player Glow in it, who also played CSGO briefly in the MVP team. I know everyone was trying to hype them because they had some massive win streakers. Maybe they are secretly the best team, but we don't know. But again, I don't follow Valorant, but didn't they just fail the qualifier to go to the LAN or something?
So yeah, the team that they lost against is New Turn Gaming. And right now, with the very, very short history of Korean Valorant, they've been against each other, I think, in 2 or 3 best of 5s now.
Right.
And both.
Is it a very small talent pool or something?
At the moment, so the tournament structure, there's Riot sanctioned, and then a lot of the tournaments I have to watch on Douya or some sort of Chinese YouTube.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm on there and I have a friend translate. But so some of the tournaments on there are Chinese hosted, where it's 8 or 10 of Chinese orgs that I've heard from League, Royal Never Give Up, Edward Gaming, just to name a few. I think Suning I've seen on there, but right now they have nothing together. They go 0-2, they shit the bed. It's always the Korean teams that make it further to the best of 5 parts of the tournament. Vision Strikers didn't qualify for Iceland's, New Turn did, and they kind of have this KT/SKT rivalry building up right now. A lot of people are kind of hyping that up. The people that watch it, the VODs have like 9 fucking views, so people aren't even watching the Asian region of Valorant right now. So it'll be kind of interesting to see what happens in Iceland, because something my friend is translating to, the Chinese players have a tremendous amount of respect for European Counter-Strike and European Valorant. Like, they hype it up a lot, and there was actually a lot of thumbnails that were like meme culture, but they were in like Chinese, so I couldn't like read them, and my friend was like trying to translate it, but it just wasn't making sense. It was like a bunch of cultural stuff, but it seems like they're pretty serious about the game. The New Turn Gaming guys, they seem to have some sort of promise, so it'll be exciting. They're not just playing like shoot 'em up, they're actually having...
No, I've just looked it up. If for people who don't know, as well as Glow, who's a very legendary 1.6 player from Korea, he plays in the Vision Strikers. 2 of his former teammates play in the New Turn Gaming. There's Perry, who used to be like the up-and-comer at the end of 1.6, and then Solo, if people don't know, is basically like the greatest Asian Counter-Strike player ever. He was essentially like... It wasn't quite like Neo and Forest, because they were like the best, but like, put it this way, he was like the 1 tier below, even though he came from Korea in 1.6. Like, he was absurdly good.
So that's interesting. That is their IGL.
But he'll be very old now, I'd imagine. I'm 38, so I'm guessing he must be like, what, 35 or something?
He's 33, yeah, it says on here. He's actually their IGL for the team, because I've watched some content that they've produced.
Right.
And it's
And by the way, bad news, if you're Korean, the wear and tear when you're 33 and you've been playing as a pro since you were 18 is going to be mental. Because that's the thing, actually, to tie into what you said about how they seem to be like more serious. That's something that Korean esports is obviously, it's basically the reason they're so good, is they just like, basically, they don't know what the concept of burnout is. They think that's just the end of your career. So they've put in, even when they had a tiny talent pool, like I used to ask them, but who do you even practice against in 1.6? And they're like, just anyone. So like, they had an absurd work ethic though. Like, that's the reason why the most infamous story about the Korean teams in 1.6 is they have all these tactics they would run that people made videos out of on YouTube, where they show you the tactic and then they show every single person on the team what they did in that tactic. And essentially, it's like the level of coordination no one's ever had in Counter-Strike. Like, they would use the concept of a pop flash, and every flash was a pop flash that the person turned from the second it went off and turned back the second you could look back. And as a result, they just had like the most ridiculous amount of structure. That was their approach to try to overcome the fact they couldn't practice against anyone good effectively. I mean, back then, this is why I'd be interested to see when we have lands back what happens with these teams. Basically, the approach those teams had to take, particularly the Korean teams, just like the Brazilian teams, if you wanted to get good, what you did is you came in your boot camp for a week in Sweden before the big European LAN tournament, and then you hoped you just leveled your game up from practicing them. And you could do it sometimes. Like, if people don't know, there was a year, 2008, you can actually look it up. I wrote an article on Fragbite about them. There was a Korean team who effectively were like the 3rd best team in the year. They were better than Fnatic that year, arguably.
I want to see a team, like a CS team, that goes against, like, and this is super abstracting it, but a CS team that goes against bots that are using the AI buzzword, derived from machine learning, using all of the demos of top teams as, you know, to digest and decide how they're going to play and how they're going to reflect against, you know, whatever team this is. And, you know, have them come up in just a total vacuum and see how differently.
You didn't follow League of Legends much, right?
No, I didn't.
Here's a mad detail for you. Bearing in mind, as we've alluded to already, it's just too much of a side tangent. AI does not exist like that. Machine learning does not exist like that. It's like it's literally just essentially like my joke is the reason why I say it's like Elon Musk shit. It's like telling you he's going to Mars when he still hasn't made the cars yet. That's like that. It's Punch and Judy show, mate. He's making you look with the left hand so you don't see what the right hand's doing or not doing in this case. Here's what's mad: Koreans already did it. The reason Koreans also have the most effective practice is not that they're the best and they practice against each other. First of all, in the beginning of League of Legends, the reason they had sister teams, this is real, was when a team from the West went to Korea, you don't play against the best one, which was Azubu Frost. You have to play against their sister team, Blaze. Sister team Blaze then comes back to Frost and goes, we will now mimic how that team plays. So you effectively get a free pseudo scrim against a team that's never played you. Then in the real tournament when they play you, they smash you because like they played you sort of, and you've never played them. Now you cannot get Westerners to do that. They will not play that style. They won't. It's basically what people do in MMA, if you don't know. Then there's the factor that even in StarCraft, another misnomer is that like Flash and Nada, but they all just played against them. They didn't. They play against the bad player in their own team, but the coach tells them that. He tells them, you're going to do this game to give him a certain type of a training. In the same way as someone sparring to get ready for an MMA fight has a guy who works with him on boxing, but he doesn't get to knock him out. He has to fight in a certain way or mimic this guy's style. He does a lot of jab, so I'll work on that. Like, you can sort of make someone like an advanced practice dummy, essentially, that can move and think. So Koreans, actually, if that was a real thing, I think they already would have mimicked it in Counter-Strike themselves. So I suspect that, like, again, Counter-Strike is a game that doesn't work that way, because if you think about it, there is no flowchart to Counter-Strike beyond the first sort of like 15 seconds, you know. After that, too many variables get involved that I don't really know that you could mimic that well. It'd be very, very difficult, at least.
The problem
there's no way to boil
that
down to play that's efficient basically 100% of the time. Like there's too much nuance. Go ahead.
The problem is that we have that already. It's called cheats, because as long as there's aim in the game, you can train a bot to aim better than any player ever could. Now, maybe like, okay, yeah, you can't perfectly aim, and you train the bot that way, but you've already like bottlenecked it in a certain way, right? Like, you know, like as long as there is a better version of a bot that can beat your bot, it will always be an aimbot. You know, if I can program a bot to hit 100% headshots, like I will just have that bot, you know, and just have him walk to the site and plant the bomb if he hasn't seen anybody, and just pop him in the head if that's the case, right? Like, you know, like I guess that's kind of like the logic. I've kind of like actually thought about like making a bot to like learn how to play games, because like the Valve demo files, I will give them credit where it's due. The Valve demo files are incredible. You know, look at Anders. He's made a whole company based off of just parsing the data files from demos, right? Like, you know, like that's incredible. But so I've actually thought about doing stuff like that, but the logical conclusion is always like, just make a hack, right?
Even though this is just like, again, it's sort of like reasoning, it's not really like an actual fact. The problem, I think, is this. If that was possible, the most logical candidate to do it would be the game devs, because to me, that would be how they would make the most godlike tutorial. They'd have a tutorial that taught you how to play the game properly. So in my opinion, like that's the person that, if anything, would ever develop this kind of technology. The idea teams would do it, yeah, I mean, it's a nice dream, but I just don't, like, basically you're not ever going to have the fucking danger room from X-Men or whatever it is you imagine. Like, it's just never going to exist.
I had actually, to ride off that point,
yeah, let's do it.
I listened to some historical, like by the numbers, just passing the time rather. And I listened to one where you guys were discussing people who were once banned for cheating, but were unbanned. And you had mentioned that they almost improved from the time when they were cheating.
Yes, obvious example, like nothing, basically.
Sure.
Know that player.
I didn't realize. Okay. Wow.
Because of a lack of instruments within the game.
I mean, never proven, by the way. It was rumored, but put it this way. I know people that basically said he did it. So it's one of those ones where, like, I suspect he was a cheat. I'll say it that way. So, yeah, basically the simple answer, same with JW, put it this way. These players who have a very suspicious background, they do seem to be preternaturally good at flanking, even when they're not cheating, shooting people through walls when they're not cheating. Like, put it this way, like, essentially there is a way that like works as a training method, sort of.
Right. It's the same way that like you can review a demo and review the movements of the player relative to like where you're at to try and like understand the game from that aspect. Now, do you think there has ever been like a shadow industry of like using cheats like on like an offline server where, you know, you're not going to get vacked, where they can like see like, oh wow, yeah, well, look at this, like using as like a learning mechanism and not like a let's cheat on stage, but let's use the cheats as like almost like a form of training? Like, is that?
I mean, what was interesting was
in 1.6.
In CS 1.6 we actually just had maps where it was the same map and they made the walls like transparent. Like Nuke was the obvious one because you could spam like all the walls on that one. So they made maps like that, and then what you could do is you could like essentially run the demo through that. It's actually one of the ways people tried to catch cheaters, and then you would sort of see if they would track people through walls. But as a result, you could also yourself, yes, exactly, you didn't have to like go to every POV in the demo. You could sort of also just watch, like, if you could record your POV and you could see, oh fuck, there was a guy behind that wall, so yeah, that did exist. The problem is VAC was very, very bad in 1.6, so you didn't have to worry about it back then. everyone now would be very scared about injecting like a new fucking map into the game or loading up a map on a server. Like, mate, the amount of things you can get vaxxed for that aren't even legit, like are just accidental, a lot of people would be really scared. And unfortunately, in the modern day, the second you're vaxxed, I mean, you've seen what happened to some of these people. Like, you might never get unbanned, you know. It works as a premise, though, for sure, yeah.
It just seemed interesting. I, don't know a lot of the scene, but I had kind of heard that, and that like chirped my interest because it's like normally you associate like bad sportsmanship to like cheating. Like, I'll fucking show them. I'll be the best.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's like when they don't have the cheats, and it's kind of like accelerated.
No, that's a misnomer completely. By the way, that premise. Listen, there are plenty of morons who cheat and plenty of people who do it for rage. But mate, there are a lot of people where it's the same as when you play a game when you're a kid. Have you never heard those stories where like, if Michael Jordan plays anything with someone, he'll cheat to win. Like, he'll cheat to win at throwing coins against the wall. He'll cheat to win at dice on the floor. Because he wants to win. And the problem is, this is why it isn't a good thing to want to win at all costs. Because the word's all costs. Like, I'll only try to win within the rules. Because I have honour. These people, the problem is, it's also the most competitive people will cheat. That's why, by the way, I know a lot of you were shocked. I wasn't at all shocked by how many people cheated of the coaches. Like, the idea that they would cheat, I assumed, if possible, some of them would be cheating. I didn't maybe know the scale of it, but the notion that there would be, like, coaches who've done things on that seems absolutely logical if you know the people. They're just humans at the end of the day.
It's the most efficient method. Like, if they think they can get away with it, they're going to do it. It's the smartest thing for them to do. And that goes for just about anything. Like,
and here's a quick little anecdote. I briefly mentioned that I was into a VR shooter called Pavlov, right? It's a VR game. Not a lot of those. A lot of them are really young, including this one. And I played it relatively early on when there was lots of bugs, let's say, including bugs where you could just take your arm, stick it through a wall, and shoot somebody on the other side of it, right?
Well, then.
Correct. Yes. So of course, when you find that out, dev makes a like half patch, right? And then you find a map where, this spot, it works particularly well, but they've already kind of patched it. So you then enter into this kind of like mental gymnastics of like, well, it's a part of the game, so it's okay.
They're not going to not use it.
They fixed it a little bit, so technically this is like approved, right? And of course, once I did that in a match, and somebody saw that I did that, they were like, whoa, you just did what? I mean, of course, we lost the match anyways because we were just getting wrecked, right? But, like, you don't understand, like, what is, like, where that line is until you either get smacked down or you see somebody get smacked down and go, no, this is bad, like.
And
there's somebody who's going to be penalizing you for this, right?
We can wrap it back around to F1, which was mentioned very, very early on in this discussion. The epitome of F1 is pushing every existing rule to its absolute boundary until somebody can call you out on it. And even then, sometimes just betting on nobody being able to call you out on it. So it's
all I've got to say is 6 wheels
for people to push. Yeah, no 6 wheels. Jesus Christ.
This video was kindly supported by Eddie, Kris with a K, Lager15, Pronogo, Shenlong, Zachary Carter, Adam Ochs, Alexander Rao, Andreas Kroknes, Animosity, Dean Tanglis, ErikHillestad, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and as always, special thanks going out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Want to suggest topics or guests for my shows? Want to ask me questions in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers? Who are the upcoming guests? Maybe you want to be part of one of those discussions I do where we nerd out. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today by using the Patreon link in the description box below.